All right, sweet. Thanks for having me out, guys. Yeah, oldish houses. Hollis maybe changed it because yeah, Alan's right. We don't have any old houses in Minnesota, but we're still going to be covering a ton of topics today. My goal is for you guys to take away one or two little nuggets of new stuff that you haven't seen before. I know how it is. I've been to a million of these seminars, and sometimes it's just the same stuff over and over. So if you can pick up a few new things, usually I call that a win for a seminar I go to. So hopefully we'll have some new stuff. I've given this class many times, probably taught this a couple dozen times now, and I got the beats down really well. I know when to start and when to end, and I can end on time really good, but Hollis made me change it today because he got a chimney expert coming, and I usually open with chimneys, but Hollis in his wisdom said, why don't you end with chimneys? Because then our chimney person can be here and make sure that she's not stepping over all the stuff that you talked about. And you know how a lot of these go is that the speaker ends up going long. And so if I got to cut off something, it should be chimneys. So I'll do my best to roll with the punches here and go totally out of sequence. So today we're starting with electrical.
So wait a minute, Reuben, I just noticed that 3 times you blamed anything that goes wrong on me. Was that your intention?
I'm saying you're making this better, Hollis. If I go wrong.
Isn't that what y'all heard?
No. No, it's this is all on me if it goes wrong. Anything that goes right is because of Hollis. Now, it's not advancing. Should I just stand here and do this? This isn't advancing it either. Maybe I got to click on the screen. There. Oh, okay, now it's working. If anybody wants a copy of the PDF, I'll leave this on the screen for a hot minute. It's not my rearranged presentation. I kind of rearranged it for you guys, but if you do want a copy of this, you can take a picture of that. It's in PDF. In the past, I made the mistake of sharing the entire slide deck, and it's like a 2.5 gig file, and nobody could get it on their mobile devices. So there's just the PDF. It'll help if you don't want to take so many notes, or you could type in this short URL. It's all lowercase. It is case sensitive. I'll leave that up there for a minute. And I'm going to put this back up on the screen again when I'm done talking too, so you can get it that way if you choose to. See some couple more phones out. I'll wait just a second here before we advance. All right, I think we all got it. We'll bring that up again later. So, all right, we're starting with electrical. When I think about electrical, I think about the power coming in overhead, thinking that's where it begins. We'll end down in the basement. And a lot of the time, clients are going to ask, who does this belong to? I mean, we'll be calling out problems with stuff on the service drop, the wires coming in overhead. I'm using the technical term service drop. When I'm talking to clients, I don't call it that. We call it the overhead wires. We use words that people understand. Thinking about who does this belong to? If we got problems with it, who owns it? And everywhere I've looked around the country, it's the utility company that owns the overhead stuff. And where it changes responsibility, we'll see if my pointer's working. Yeah, there we go, it works. Right here is basically the point of connection. Right where you've got that clamp, that's where it changes to the homeowner's responsibility, everywhere you go. So in this particular case, you got these overhead wires coming in, and we got this goofy connection here. It comes down. This is all unprotected. In the middle of the inspection, I got the agent going, yeah, that's all owned by the utility company. They're going to take care of all this. You don't need to worry about it. Well, that's not really the case. The stuff that the utility, all right, I got to figure this out. The stuff that the utility company owns is all right up here, but right after these connections, this is all the homeowner's responsibility. And it looks like the plan was to change this to an underground entrance, but they haven't yet made that change. And this is all going to be the homeowner's responsibility. So it's nice to know who owns what here for when clients are asking you about this. When you got overhead wires in contact with trees, the general rule of thumb there is that when it's pole to pole, it's all owned by the utility company. And when it's pole to house, the maintenance is going to be on the homeowners. The way the utility companies explain it is that the vegetation on the property is the responsibility of the homeowners. When we're seeing trees in contact with any of the overhead power lines, we always recommend service, say have the tree branches serviced. We don't want damage to the overhead power lines. This is a huge one we find. Do you guys see this often in your area? I would call this a life safety issue. We've got the neutral wire here. It's fine if that's exposed, no big deal. But then we got the two hots coming in, or if there's any electricians in the room, we could call them ungrounded conductors. One is insulated, the other one is not. That uninsulated conductor, this is live. You touch that, you're getting lit up, might get electrocuted. I got it was an old hockey coach for my sister. He was out in his yard moving an aluminum ladder around, touched one of those, he got killed. This is a serious issue, and I know you guys got ice dams in your area too. Think about people taking an aluminum roof rake, pulling snow off the roof, touching one of these things. Serious electrocution hazard. This is owned by the utility company. It's their responsibility to fix this. And we find this at tons and tons of houses. And if you're not looking for it, it's easy to miss. So pay attention to those overhead connectors. There's another example of one where they had just wrapped it in friction tape, but we still had a lot of exposed aluminum here where the friction tape is just worn off. There's another example. This is all icy up here. It kind of had to hang over the edge of the roof with my arm and my camera to get a shot of it, but same thing. Exposed conductor there, exposed clamp here. You're seeing it over and over again. These service entrance conductors aren't in great shape. And these ones are especially nasty, where you've got the wires coming into the masthead here. That's completely bare. Those service entrance conductors need to be replaced. This is not going to be a quick and simple fix. And that's going to go down all the way into the meter. This is all the homeowner's responsibility. And then another one that we get into, this is a required repair in some of the cities in the Twin Cities area. You think about bonding the entire system, all of the metallic stuff in the home needs to be connected together so we don't have different potential, and we call it bonding, but also a lot of the service panels are going to be grounded through the metal water piping. They're relying on that metal water piping as one of the ground methods. And there was an assumption that the water piping is always going to be metal. It's always going to go right into the ground, and it's going to be a good electrode to connect the system to the earth. Then we started using a bunch of plastic, and they said you can't rely on the water piping anymore. But on older houses, they still did. And this is my crude drawing because I could not find a good illustration of this. But basically, you've got the main panel here. They would run a big copper wire to the water piping, and then you'd have metal water piping coming all the way down. It'd come through the water meter and into the ground, and that's one of your grounding electrodes. So if we see any break in this, it means that that's a problem with the main electric service. And so we're always looking to make sure that you've got a ground clamp, just a big clamp going on one side of the copper tubing to the other side, and a big copper wire going across it. So if somebody ever does go in there and remove that water meter, you're not breaking that continuity. So it's another one of those things we look for on old houses, oldish houses in the Twin Cities. And this is what it looks like. We've got a cutaway here. Here's the main panel. We've got this wire coming over here. It connects to the metal water piping. And then at some point, we're relying on that metal water piping, and we got another clamp going all the way down to make sure that that bond is continuous across the water meter. And just little notes on that. When you're seeing these bonding clamps, everything needs to be free of paint. It needs to be tight. The copper wire needs to be free from paint. My advice would be don't touch it. The last time I tried to be a nice guy, I saw one of these clamps and it was loose. And I was like, I'm just going to take care of this for him. And I got out my screwdriver, cranked it down a little bit, and the clamp snapped on me. I'm like, great, now I'm going to the store. And so that was another 45 minutes tacked on to my home inspection. Now, when I see them loose, I report them as loose. and I suggest somebody else tighten it. I try to fix the little stuff when I can, but that was the last little one that I fixed. Next topic is fuse panels. I know fuse panels get a bad rap. Insurance companies don't like them. There's nothing inherently unsafe about a fuse. When a fuse blows, it's blown. Nobody's gonna be able to flip it back on like a circuit breaker. It needs to be replaced. However, fuses get easily defeated. I think we all understand this. And a lot of fuse services end up being overfused. They put too big of fuses in. This previous one, I just had to share this. This is one of the biggest fuse panels I've seen on a single family home. And for contrast, this is the smallest fuse panel I've ever seen. This was the electric service. That was the whole service for the house. We had two 15-amp fuses. It was a 120-volt service. That's all they had. So what are the odds of those fuses blowing? Of course, they're very high. This doesn't come anywhere close to today's demands for electricity. So what you end up seeing is what I got pictured here. If anybody knows the difference in colors for fuses, usually when you got blue, it's going to be a 15-amp, orange is 20, green is 30. And I don't know if you can see this photo clearly enough, but every one of these fuses in the whole house was a 30-amp fuse. They had replaced everything to make sure that their fuses wouldn't blow anymore. And this is why insurance companies don't like fuse panels, among other reasons, is that they're so easily defeated. So some things that people could do to make the fuse services a little bit safer. Number one is to install a rejection base. It's some guy that looks like this, where it basically threads into an existing socket. It's going to be just the same type of threads that you would have for a light bulb. And then it will only accept a smaller fuse size. That's something that could be done. However, most of the time when I come across a fuse service, my clients just don't really care. They don't want to hear about all these ways to make it safer. They're like, I want it out of here. Insurance companies don't like them. A lot of insurance companies will charge a premium for them, especially if it's not a 100-amp service. So most of the time when we find these, we're just telling our clients, get an electrician to come in here and probably replace it. And I'm usually looking for an excuse to recommend repairs by an electrician. There's almost always something wrong where somebody has messed up the wiring in there and we're calling for somebody to come out. It usually ends up being a replacement. Very similar with knob and tube wiring. That's what I got going on here. I'm sure you guys got plenty of this in your area. It's identified by, you've got these ceramic tubes that wires pass through, and then you've got the ceramic knobs that, oh, that's so much better. You got the ceramic knobs that the wires go wrapping around. And just about every time we find knob and tube wiring, we find problems with it. And I'm almost always looking for an excuse to have an electrician come out and repair it or replace it as needed. Now, I'll get into a little bit of why in a second here, but number one, open splices. It is acceptable to have open splices with knob and tube wiring, but the way that they were done was you'd end up having the wires wrapped around each other a whole bunch of times, and then they would use solder. They'd solder that connection together, and then you'd wrap a whole bunch of friction tape around it. Typically, when somebody is making changes to knob and tube wiring, they're not aware of all of this, or they don't know how to do it, and they end up going in with Romex or NM cable, if we're going to be using the correct terms, and they just end up splicing it with wire nuts. Those type of open air splices are not acceptable for knob and tube wiring. We end up seeing that a lot because people think that you can just do it any way it works. We're looking for damaged wiring. Find a lot of this in attics. A lot of the time you've got heat damage when that wire is exposed in attics and it ends up getting to be 150 degrees in the attic and it's sitting there for a long time. The insulation around these conductors gets very brittle and it ends up falling off. And we end up with a lot of exposed conductors. I find this in older, well, I shouldn't say older. I find it in newer electrical fixtures. A lot of the time when the knob and tube wire, I should
Tom, you there?
Pardon? No. Yeah, there's more of it. I think my next slide. Yeah, here. Find this in a lot of light fixtures too. Modern light fixtures are rated for 90 degrees Celsius, but knob and tube wiring is only rated for 60 degrees Celsius. So it's fine to have knob and tube wiring going into, say, an old bare porcelain fixture. Those don't get that hot, but you get modern fixtures, they want wires rated for a much higher temperature. And when you don't have that, it overheats, the insulation falls off, you've got a serious shock hazard or fire hazard. And that's what I'm showing here is you've got bare conductors here. If the fixture is properly grounded or bonded, I should say, and that wire shorts out with the fixture, it's going to cause a big flash, bunch of sparks are going to come out, it's going to overload the circuit, and the circuit breaker is going to turn off. If this fixture isn't bonded, and the wires come in contact with the fixture, it will just silently energize the fixture. And then the next person who touches that metal would either get shocked or, depending on where they are, they could get electrocuted. And we'll come back to that in a second here, but that's another thing that goes wrong with knob and tube wiring is bringing it into fixtures that aren't rated for those temperatures. And then here we've got some open splices in an attic. Here's what I was talking about earlier. Knob and tube wiring is never supposed to be covered by insulation. It was designed to be an open air wire. It's designed to dissipate heat freely. When you have it covered by insulation, you know, I've heard different schools of thought. Technically, it's incorrect. It's never been allowed. But let's say you're in an attic, you've got it covered with insulation. Now, I've measured attic temps 140, 150 degrees many times. Which is better, to have that insulation on this side of the insulation, or to have the wires on this side of the insulation where it's going to be super hot in the attic, or to have it on the house side of the insulation where we know it's going to be somewhere around 70 to 80 degrees if you have a climate controlled house? I don't know. I think there's problems with both of them. Technically, it doesn't meet code when you bury it by insulation, but I've never found any issues with that, and I don't make a huge thing about it, but we do let our clients know it's technically incorrect. So that's another defect with it. Now this one is often mistaken as knob and tube wiring, but you're not looking at knob and tube right here. This is actually an antenna wire that's passing through the attic space. And it connects to one of these porcelain knobs, just like knob and tube wiring does. And if you're a rookie home inspector, you might report knob and tube wiring in the attic, but it's not. It's just an antenna. So when you see a single wire like this, don't make that mistake. It ended up going to a receptacle that was probably located in the kitchen or somewhere close to that, where you've had this slot is going to be for the antenna wire. You've got another slot here for a ground wire, and then you've got the neutral and the hot, and this is what a radio would plug into. So don't mistake the two.
Well, you know, Reuben, the worst shock I've ever gotten in my life was off of one of those antennas.
Really?
Yeah.
How did that happen? Was it energized?
Apparently, so was I.
Nice.
I touched it. I mean, I thought it was just an antenna wire. I touched it. No big deal, right? Well, then I leaned, had my forehead touched it, and I touched the cast iron waste stack simultaneously. And as soon as I completed that circuit to a ground path, boom.
Scary.
It was awful.
Wow. Wow.
I now know why electroshock therapy works. Because I gave it to myself.
Oh my gosh. And so another concern with knob and tube wiring, besides all the stuff that can go wrong, I mean, like I told you, I'm looking for an excuse to have an electrician come out and do a bunch of repairs on this, because insurance companies hate this stuff. We did a survey of a whole ton of insurance companies back in July of 2019, just asking a very simple question: will you insure a home with knob and tube wiring? And these were the results, but let me skip ahead, because we did it again a couple years later. And I know it's very small font, but I'll kind of jump to the end here. Starting at AAA, they say no, going all the way down to Westfield Insurance, no. No questions asked, just will you insure a house with knob and tube wiring? No. And then we've got a few companies here. Allstate said probably, but there'd be a 5% surcharge. And then we had a few others that said, yeah, but. Nobody just said yes. There was a lot of exceptions, a lot of fine print for the few people who said they might be willing to insure a house with knob and tube wiring. So this is always a concern when it comes to insurance companies. This outlet just had a bad day. I don't know how to explain that one. All right, ungrounded outlets. I know we run across this all the time. Few different ways to fix that. Number one, if you have a continuous metal path going all the way back to the panel, let's say you've got metal conduit going to the outlet, you've got a metal box. It's as simple as running a small little length of wire, we usually call it a pigtail wire, from the ground screw, and it connects to the metal box. This is an acceptable repair. I would not try to design this repair for your clients. This is just a talking point. If people ask you about what it takes to fix it, you could say this is something an electrician might do. In the past, I used to try to be very helpful where I would take a 2-lead tester and I'd stick 1 lead of my tester into the hot slot on the receptacle, and then I'd touch the other one to the metal box, and I'd say, okay, look, you got a ground path. You could just bond it to the box. But in some cases, you may have an improper ground path on that box. Let's say that box is touching a concrete block wall. That's going to fool my little tester. It's going to tell me it's grounded, but that's not an acceptable ground path going through the concrete block. But it is enough to fool my tester. So I don't design these repairs. I don't recommend you design them for your clients, but you can talk about things that could be done by an electrician. So that's one of them. Another acceptable way to do it is to go back to a 2-prong receptacle. I don't recommend that either. The problem with that is that as soon as somebody does need to plug in a 3-prong outlet, we all know what they're going to do. They're going to take one of these 2-prong to 3-prong adapters. They're going to plug this in there. And the only time that these things can be safely used, and it says it right on the literature for these things, is when they are connected with a screw going into a grounded 2-prong receptacle. Gotta let that sink in. Not a grounding receptacle, but a grounded 2-prong receptacle. Has anyone ever seen one of these? I don't think I ever have. I mean, I've seen them sold. I've seen 2-prong receptacles that have a ground screw, but what's the point of it? If you have a ground path, at that point, you're going to install a 3-prong outlet. So just about every time you have one of these adapters used, it's wrong and it's unsafe. So I don't like the idea of going back to 2-prong outlets ever. And then, and then the last way to fix an ungrounded 3-prong outlet, find it all the time, is to add GFCI protection. That's always acceptable. It's not the best way. I mean, I think the best way is to actually have a grounded 3-prong outlet, but the electric code does allow this in most situations. There are a few areas in houses where they say you always need to have a 3-prong outlet, but most of the time you can add GFCI protection and it's acceptable. And in that case, you just need to have the little stickers that go on the outlet that says no equipment ground protection. In that case, it's fine. And this was just a delightful photo showing trades not knowing what the other one is doing. We had, like I showed earlier, we had some of the water piping that was bonded. They had bonded the water piping. They had actually used this wire to kind of create a bootleg ground for a 3-prong outlet, but then they ended up having to replace the faucet. The plumber replaced the faucet, but they saw there was some electrical connected to it, so they left the faucet hanging there. And at this point, it's not doing anything. But they didn't want to take it out because they just didn't know about it. And this is just a fun photo. Whole bowl of wrong here, we call it. And this goes back to what I was talking about, having ungrounded or unbonded light fixtures. Something we like to check when we're in bathrooms is to make sure if you've got a metallic light fixture, it's bonded. And the concern there is, like I showed earlier, if you have a metallic wire come in contact with the metal housing on that light fixture, it would silently energize it if it's not bonded. And if I were just standing here and I was to touch an energized light fixture, I'd get a shock. The electricity would travel through my body, through my socks, my shoes, the floor. There's a ton of resistance here. So it'd be enough where I'd live. It'd still be unpleasant, but I'd live through it. But if I were to get that exact same shock and my other hand were touching this metal faucet, which might be connected to copper pipes that go all the way down into the ground that have a really good path back to the earth, and I got that exact same shock, I'd probably get electrocuted, especially if my hands were wet. So where you get a shock makes a big difference on whether you're going to live through it or not. So bathrooms, kitchens, those are really bad places to get shocks. So bathrooms are one of the first places that started requiring GFCI protection just for that reason. So when we have ungrounded light fixtures in these areas, this is always something that we report on. And to help figure out whether a light fixture is grounded or not, we use one of those little electrical sniffers. The technical name for this is a non-contact electrical tester, but I just preferred the name voltage sniffer because it's easier to say. If you hold one of these up and it lights up your tester on a metallic fixture, it could be an energized fixture. In most cases, it simply means that that fixture is emitting an electromagnetic field because it's not properly bonded. And if you want to check, I recommend using the back of your finger to do this. You could just touch it really quickly. If you feel a little tingle, the whole fixture's energized. I've never had that happen in my life. But something else that'll happen is if you have your electrical sniffer held up to it and it lights up your sniffer, and you touch that metal fixture with your finger, the light is going to go off on your tester. I'll show you an example of that. So as far as these sniffers go, I've tested a ton of them. I've got a bunch of inspectors in my company. I want everybody using the same equipment. I want them using good equipment. I've tested a lot of these. I hate, sorry, am I doing that? I see a menu popping up here. What's going on here? Are you guys doing that? Okay, all right, very good. So yeah, I hate most of these testers. I get a lot of false positives with them. Most of them are no good, but the one that I like, and I'll be selling it in the lobby after class. No, just kidding. The one that I like is going to be this one right in the middle, the Fluke Volt Alert. This one does a really good job because it's rated at 90 volts and higher. A bunch of these other ones that'll go off at, say, 30 volts or 50 volts or whatever it is, you end up getting way too many false positives. The thing is going off on you all the time. I would only recommend getting one that has a much higher voltage. And the one with the Fluke, it doesn't have an on-off button. It's just on all the time. And somehow the batteries last for just about ever. So big fan of that one. And when I was telling you, if you have an ungrounded metallic fixture and you touch it with your finger, it's going to turn the light off. There's a good example of that. I'm holding the non-contact tester, and every time I touch my skin to the metal of this desk lamp, the tester shuts off. There's nothing wrong with an ungrounded metallic fixture. It's just, where is it located? Like a desk lamp, they're all two-prong plugs. They're not bonded. It's perfectly fine. I just wouldn't want to see that in a bathroom. So that's one little trick you can do. And then just a couple other notes about these voltage sniffers. This comes right from the manufacturer. All the manufacturer's instructions are essentially the same. You read enough of these manuals, you see they They all kind of copy each other. The big thing is that you need to be holding the tester, and you should not be using these testers when you're wearing gloves. The tester relies on your body's capacitance, which it picks up by you touching the tester with your skin. It relies on that to work properly. So if you're holding gloves, if you're insulated from that tester, it might not work properly. Now, I've done a bunch of testing to try to figure out how much of an impact this makes, and I can tell you it's not huge, but in some situations, it could be enough to make the difference between the tester going off and not going off. So anytime you're using one of these things, make sure you've got bare skin touching the tester. There's an example of it here. I've got the tester just sitting on a live wire, and my tester shows no current until the minute I touch the tester with my fingers, and then it does pick up the current. Now, it took me a little while to play around with my tester to get it in the exact right place where that would make a difference, but it can make a difference. So always make sure you're touching it with your skin. And question, is this white wire energized? I'm getting a bunch of blank looks. Is it energized? No, it cannot possibly be energized. Well, you see both ends of the wire. There is no current going through that wire. So why is my tester telling me it's energized? It's because these testers don't tell you if things are energized or not. Be careful how you report stuff you find with your voltage sniffer. Just because your voltage sniffer lights up when you're holding it close to something does not mean that it's energized. It just means there's power somewhere. Might be close by. It means you don't have a no. It doesn't mean you have a yes. Is that clear? It's wrapped around an energized wire, and the magnetic field is going through this wire, and it's enough to set off my tester. So just be really careful. If you hold it up to a wire and you get nothing, you can be assured there's no current going through there. If you hold it up to a wire and you get a light, maybe it's energized. You don't know. I see home inspectors misreport on this constantly when I read other home inspection reports. So know what your tools do. All right, normally this is where we break for lunch, but we're gonna keep moving on. All right, plumbing. Bunch of stuff to talk about with plumbing. We will start off with traps, drum traps. Before I get into explaining drum traps, let's just talk about how a regular trap works. You all know that it's here to prevent sewer gases from coming in. And the way that these P-traps work that we all see everywhere is that they rely on water going through the trap to scour the trap. The water draining through there keeps them clean. You take apart these traps, most of the time they're very clean on the inside. It's the scouring action of water. This is not a sped up video. This is this clear trap I was able to find. You'll see some video of these clear traps later on here. But we've got water going through there. You can see the water is just pouring through there. This is not a sped up video. This is what it looks like when it's going through. Not much collects inside there. They work very well. On the other side of the spectrum, you have a drum trap. These devices don't have any scouring action at all. You find these at a lot of old houses where water enters on one side, it leaves on the other side, and there's no flushing action created. The water goes through here fairly slowly because it's such a huge thing. And these things are really prone to getting clogged. Any sediment that goes in the bottom of that, any hair, any whatever that goes into these drum traps, it stays in there. And these things can turn into miniature cesspools. So we find a lot of them that end up getting clogged and not working well. They're not allowed by the plumbing codes anymore, but you still see them in a ton of houses. It doesn't mean it's reason to replace it, but it is a reason to have a word of caution about them for your clients. And we always tell our clients, put a hairnet or something over the drain to help make sure that the only thing that ever goes inside here is water. It's going to help make sure it doesn't get clogged. Well, here's just a little section out of the IRC talking about drum traps. That is a prohibited trap design. And then another prohibited trap design, just for fun, is any type of trap with a concealed partition, like this one, if it's made out of materials that could corrode. Let's get the exact language. Except lavatory traps made of plastic, stainless steel, or other corrosion-resistant material. Then you could have an interior partition separating it with an old bottle trap like this. That's all going to be something that could corrode on the inside. And the parts separating the trap in half could actually corrode out to the point where you don't have any type of trap. So these are no longer allowed. You can get newer versions of it. Oh, I thought that was my next slide. This is just a fun photo. Anybody have any idea where this photo came from? I think this is called a G trap. This was at the Biltmore in Asheville. Recently took a tour of that a few months ago, and I just had to take a picture of this G trap. And they also had the biggest drum trap I've ever seen. It was I think this was all brass, just like a gigantic drum trap at that fixture. But this is more of the drum traps we typically see. We'll see them most often at bathtubs, but occasionally we'll find drum traps at laundry sinks. Sometimes we'll even find them at kitchen sinks. And they come in all different kinds of configurations. When you're lucky, the clean out is at the top like this, but not always. Sometimes they've got the clean outs facing upside down. I would hate to be the person who has to clean that one out. They can be made out of lead. When they're made out of lead, it's a much softer material. And sometimes somebody will put a wrench on the top of this thing and they'll start cranking this down, and the whole trap will start to taco. It'll just bend apart. No fun to open those things up. There's a good example of it. This thing had fallen apart as they tried to crank it open to clean it out. And then they used, I don't even know what, plumber's putty or something like that. And they patched all around the sides of it to try to get this back together again. There was one that's just completely fallen apart. Surely going to be allowing sewer gas into the house. Another one. Here's one where you got to unscrew the bottom of it to get at it. This one was made out of lead, and we've got a couple of lead drain lines. And you can see it used to be all the way up here. They took a nasty notch out of the floor joist to make room for this trap and the drain. But over time, gravity has just done a lot of work on that trap, and it's pulled it way down. The whole thing is sunken here. This one was actively leaking. We got a radiator hose and who knows what else. So you find all different kinds of goofy things with these traps. This is probably my favorite one, where they had MacGyvered this together. Basically, you had the bottom half of a coffee can. We got a bunch of glue, tape, tar, string, and then they painted it red for good measure to make it a little faster, I think. And in all these cases, we end up suggesting to have a plumber come out and fix it. If I find a trap that's all working, if I find a trap that's working perfectly fine, we say put something on there to make sure it's only water going down. But in no case do we just find a perfectly good trap and say, look, this is a prohibited design. You need to get a plumber to come out here and replace it, because they still do work. All right, next one, floor drains. Are floor drains required in your area? Just show of hands if they're required. Okay, not required anywhere, but most houses have them, right? I'm not getting any response. Maybe, okay, maybe not. In the Twin Cities, just about every house has them. Every basement is going to have a floor drain somewhere, and they usually have the same problem. Floor drains are just like any other plumbing fixture. They're going to have a trap. You got a dip where water sits. It prevents sewer gas from coming into the house. And this is what it looks like. Here's a cutaway view of a floor drain. You got this little dip here. Water always sits here. And then you've also got this other thing called a bypass or a clean out hole. And the idea is that if you've got a clog somewhere in the drain line, like way back here, it's really tough to get a snake and shove it through that trap and have it clear that drain out. So most floor drains, it's not required, but most floor drains are going to have this thing that goes over the top, and you can actually remove a clean out plug. You can stick a snake down there, clean out the drain downstream. What ends up happening a ton of the time, though, is that people remove that clean out plug, they clean it out, and then they don't put the plug back, and the threads get completely nastified like you're seeing here. At this point, you're not going to get a plug to go back in there. So what do? You get a bolt plug. You get one of these guys, a bolt plug is one name for it, just some type of expandable rubber plug. This is one version of it. This thing is going to fit in there. You tighten down that wing nut. It's going to expand out. It's going to look like this. It's going to fill those threads nice and tight. This is a perfectly acceptable repair. So that's fine. We have now fixed the missing clean out plug, but we got to go back to why was the clean out plug removed? Gets removed because you got a clog in the drain line. Has the clog been fixed? Or does the clog exist at the trap itself? You got a clog at the trap and you remove that clean out plug. Let me go back a couple of slides. If the clog exists right down here and you take this plug out of here, well, now water is going to drain through the clean out hole. Water's just going to drain through here just fine, but we still have a clogged trap. So now when you put a plug back in here, now it's not going to work anymore. So as a home inspector, when I find a missing clean out plug, I'm not making a quick, simple comment saying, hey, this is a health hazard. We've got sewer gas coming into the house. Put a plug in here. I don't know why the plug was removed. And there's a good chance that we've got a clogged trap. That's usually why people leave the plug removed. Now, in a really good situation, you can just put the plug back in and everything works. But I have come across many situations where the reason it's clogged is because somebody poured something down there they shouldn't have, like leftover mortar or tile grout or concrete, and they've completely ruined that trap. I had a sister who bought a house who had that situation. I tried everything in my power to clean out that trap after she bought the house, could not clean it out. And the fix was to get a sledgehammer, break up all the concrete floor around it, dig all the dirt around it, get a Sawzall, cut the pipe off, get a new floor drain, put it in, put the dirt back, pour new concrete. This is like a half-day project for a plumber, maybe an all-day project if they want to milk it out. It's not cheap. And in Minneapolis, we've got this repair program where you need to have houses inspected before they go on the market. And every time we find a missing cleanout plug, we need to come back out and make sure the drain is working properly. And I'd say about 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10, when we'd come back out to make sure the drain is working right, brand new floor drain, big hunk of new concrete on the basement floor, big repair. So this is my long-winded way of saying, when you find a missing cleanout plug at a floor drain, tell your clients what this could mean. It might mean you need to replace that floor drain. The fix is going to be put the plug back in and then have somebody verify that it works properly. Okay. All right. What's going on here? What do we see? Any thoughts on this? What's going wrong here? I know everybody gravitates towards the receptacle pointing up. There's actually nothing wrong with this. This is not considered a wet location. It's okay to have a receptacle pointing up below the kitchen sink. It's not supposed to leak, but this is a flipped house. They ended up doing a whole bunch of work here, and well, they did a lot of stuff wrong, but they've got a drain going uphill, and they've got the dishwasher drain connected on the wrong side of the trap. It's supposed to connect on the house side of the trap up here, not the sewer side of the trap, but they got all this new stuff here. But the most unfortunate part is that they had kind of gutted this kitchen. They put it all back together, and they left the original steel drain lines in the wall. This was a really good opportunity to replace those steel drain lines, and they left them alone. So now, one of the things that we like to do during our inspections, anytime you've got a house with older drain lines, and when I'm talking older, I mean anything other than plastic, we like to run a lot of water in those fixtures. I'll fill up both sides of the kitchen sink. Might take a while, but I'll fill it up, maybe about 6 inches or so, have stoppers on both sides, and then pull the stoppers and make sure all that water drains all the way down. A lot of the time, you'll have the water drain for a little bit. I mean, if you just run the faucet, it's probably going to drain fast enough so that it doesn't start backing up. It's going to drain as fast as the faucet is filling, but many times we'll drain both sides, and we'll see the water go down, 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 and then it just kind of stops because it's been filling that pipe up with water. And now it takes another 15 minutes for the rest of the sink to drain. That's unacceptable. Nobody's going to tolerate that. And it's something we want to catch at every one of our inspections. That's what I'm showing you here on this next slide. I pulled both the stoppers. You can see that water is standing perfectly still. I had filled up both sides of that sink, and the water got down to about here, and then it took about another 15 minutes for the rest of that to drain. How do you fix this? You replace the drain lines. That's the fix. You're not going to get a snake in those steel drain lines and clean them out. I mean, those things corrode on the inside. The diameter gets smaller and smaller to the point where there's just about nothing coming through there. When we find steel drains, we report this as being at the end of its life expectancy. If you're following the ASHI standard of practice, you're required to report on stuff that's at the end of its life expectancy. Now, whether you decide for yourself that a steel drain line is at the end of its life expectancy, that's up to you. But for my company, absolutely. That's one of those components. Doesn't mean if it's all working fine that anything needs to be done, but it's letting people know this stuff is aged. So yeah, how do you fix it? You replace it. I know some people might say put Drano down there. That's a great way to eat through your pipes. That's what caused this. Someone was using Drano all the time. They ate right through it. And we've seen many examples of that. This was just a fun one. If anybody was inspecting around 2007, 2008, 2009, you remember we had all these bank-owned properties, and then they would turn off the water and the gas and the electricity, and you'd inspect these houses in the winter, it'd just be a winter wonderland inside the house. That's what was going on here. We had a little pinhole leak in the drain line, and it created the world's ugliest icicle covered in rust here. There's another rusted out drain line. Sewer inspections. Just quick show of hands. How many people do sewer inspections themselves? Got like maybe 2, maybe 3. How many of you work with somebody who does sewer inspections so you can offer that yourself? 1 or 2 maybe. How many people recommend sewer inspections? Now I'm seeing about half the room. Yeah. All right. Just curious what people are. This is more for me. Just curious what people are doing in different parts of the country. For us, we started recommending sewer inspections a long time ago. And then it got to a point where we just said, we need to kind of control this a little bit more. And we started partnering with somebody, and we started offering sewer inspections. We were subbing it out to a guy who would do it. And the first year, we probably did sewer inspections at about 5% of our inspections. Excuse me. The next year, it was about 10%, and then maybe 20%. And it kept growing. And today, we do sewer inspections at, it fluctuates on average about 50%. But every other home inspection we do, we're doing a sewer inspection. And we're not cramming this down people's throats. It has just become standard in the Twin Cities market. If you're getting a home inspection, you ought to get a sewer inspection. And it's not something we recommend for old houses. It's something we recommend with home inspections. You get the difference there? Doesn't matter how old the house is. I used to always say, yeah, you're buying an old house, you got big trees, old growth roots. They can get in the drain line. These old ones can be really prone to problems. But let me just show you a few videos of newer houses less than 10 years old. And I guarantee it, these are not Minnesota defects I'm showing you. This is stuff that happens all over the country. Let's, and Hollis, there is audio with this video. It's okay if we don't have it because I can narrate and it's kind of goofy audio, but I will have some other stuff that I'd probably want audio for. Look at this. This is less than 10 years old. It's all plastic. The sewer camera is completely buried. We've got a huge belly in there. Something went wrong. Here's another one. He's shoving it down the drain line for a while. I sped it up here because, you know, it's, you can only watch this for so long. But look at this. Huge break. I don't know what caused the break, but we've got roots going in. I mean, that's a huge separation in there. Newer drain line, less than 10 years old. I don't know why it's paused there for so. Oh, it's because I'm talking through the video. Let's go to another one. Oh. I don't know how to jump ahead. Maybe I can't. Oh, well, I'm not going to make you watch it again. You can use your imagination. I'll tell you what I show you in the video. It's a whole bunch of new sewers where the sewer lines are crushed, they're split apart, they're destroyed, they've got bellies. We've got video after video of this. And it got to the point where we said, we're not recommending sewer inspections on old houses, we're recommending on every house. And we do. So it's taken off. We're doing sewer inspections at about half of the inspections we do today. And, you know, I guess my advice would be if you don't have somebody that you're partnering up with, you might consider doing that. And I see someone with a mic here. We got a question.
What kind of training do you need to actually have, like, you know, to be skilled at sewer training, or sewer inspections? I'm sorry.
So what kind of training do you need? I have no idea as far as what you need. Now, I can tell you what we did was we ended up partnering up with a guy who did sewer inspections. He had his own company, and he had been doing this for many years. He was a second generation sewer dude, and he ended up taking us in the field for a long time and going over what he does and just training over and over again, kind of the way that we would train home inspectors, to the point where we could competently do this. And we had seen enough to where he gave us his blessing and said, yep, you know how to do it. Now we pass it along to our other inspectors. So I don't know of any formal training other than there's some people who will do training online. Can't remember names off the top of my head, sorry. See another question here. If it's super short, I can repeat it for our audience. Otherwise, yeah.
I live in Herndon.
Hey.
We had a sewage inspection on the line. In the end, it was shifted, maybe from the earthquake or something. I don't know. But it turned into a little bit of a mess between the plumber and the city. The guy who was working for the city kept on mentioning that it was illegal for the camera to go past into the city sewage system. Just something probably to keep in the back of the head. At least in Herndon, you can only go up onto the property. The second you start going to the city sewer stuff, they consider it illegal.
Sure. And I'd say, as far as I know, we never enter the city sewer system either. We inspect it all along the property. As once we hit the city connection, our inspection ends. Yep. I think that's pretty standard anywhere you go. So yeah, I guess my point is that there's a lot of value in these sewer inspections. It's typically a very expensive repair. And I'd say probably 10 to 20% of the time on old houses, we find very expensive repairs. All right, next one, water flow. We all know about checking for water flow in the house. You know, you're looking for galvanized water distribution pipes, you're looking for undersized pipes and all that, but what if it all looks good inside the house and you still get bad water flow? I'll talk about what we do to check water flow. We turn on a high flow fixture, something like an outside faucet, or if you have a laundry faucet, some of those older laundry faucets where you've got 1/2-inch water pipes going all the way to the faucet. It's like a full bore faucet and you open up, you got a ton of water coming out. We'll turn on one of those to kind of simulate somebody doing a load of laundry. And then we'll go upstairs and we'll run the other fixtures. And we'll make sure we still got adequate water flow while something big is running at the same time. What I'm showing you here is a kitchen faucet. So I'm only 1 story up from the basement. And I've got that faucet all the way open. And you see what the flash on my camera captured, suspended in the air? With the faucet fully open, we got a couple drops of water coming out of here. If I go up another story and I open up the faucet at the shower, I'm going to hear air getting sucked into the shower. There's going to be nothing coming out of there at all. This is a huge issue. Now, if I were to just turn on the kitchen faucet, it'd work fine. But it's where it's trying to supply flow to all these fixtures at the same time. That's where we got problems. If you're on city water, it's not going to be a problem with pressure. The city gives you the pressure that the city gives you. You have no control over that. In this case, the pressure is actually a bit high. You know, they say good range is going to be below 80. That's what's safe for a house. This one is actually a little bit high, but whatever the city gives you, that's what they give you. You have nothing to say about the pressure. People say, oh, I want to make sure the house has good water pressure. We know what they mean. They want to make sure it has good water flow. But if you've got a little pencil of a pipe and it's 80 PSI at that pencil of a pipe coming into the house, it's going to be 80 PSI at that fixture with everything closed. Once you open a fixture, it could dramatically drop off because you got a ton of friction loss from those pipes being so small. So, well, hold on. Okay, I'll come back to that thought in just a second. Couple causes for it. One, I mean, we know that if you've got galvanized distribution pipes inside the house, those things corrode on the inside. That's obvious. But another one would be if you've got a galvanized supply pipe, the pipe that brings water into the house. That could cause a huge reduction in water flow. If you've got all visible copper tubing, all newer stuff, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've got copper going all the way out to the street. And I'm making an assumption for you guys. I think that your area is probably going to be similar to the Twin Cities, where a lot of you've only got one water pipe going down the street. You've only got one water supply for the city. And if you want to figure out which side of the street it's on, is it on your side or is it across the street? Look for fire hydrants. That'll tell you if it's across the street or not. So you only got one of those. And a lot of the time when you got an old house and you've got a galvanized supply pipe or maybe a lead supply pipe, I think I got, no, that's not lead. We got a lot of lead supplies too. Sometimes you can see it coming in from the street. Sometimes it all looks good and it just looks like copper. But if somebody wanted to replace it, a lot of the time they would replace it from inside the house, going all the way out to the curb stop in the yard, right before it crosses the street, and they'd put in all new piping there. But then the original stuff, the galvanized or the lead, they would leave that stuff going across the street because that's the really expensive stuff to tear up the street and replace that. They'd leave that in place. So even sometimes you can look at a house and all the water piping looks good, but you've got poor water flow, then it's a question of what's going across the street.
Now, Reuben, we got a question
Yeah,
about telling the difference between galvanized and lead pipes. Can
Yeah.
you just make sure you touch on that before you're done?
sure. And you know what? I wish I had some pictures of lead. I should have put some of those in there. But to tell the difference, if you've got galvanized piping, you're always going to have threads, and it's always going to be very hard. When you've got lead, I don't think I've ever seen threads going on lead. What you end up having is it's something called a wiped joint. And it's basically, you've got this pipe coming up, and then you got what looks like a big ball of lead, like somebody just took a whole bunch of lead and poured it on there and kept wiping it over and over again. It's big and flared. And if you take a screwdriver, you can even take your fingernail, but usually I would take an awl or a screwdriver, and I just kind of drag it across the lead, and it turns from a very dull color to a very shiny color. It scratches very easily. And I mean, seriously, you can scratch or almost dig your fingernail into a lead pipe and change the look of it. When it comes to galvanized steel, not so much. You can't do that at all. Hopefully that answers that question.
Well, did you talk about a wipe joint? I think you had a picture of one a few slides
Did I
back.
have a wipe joint? Maybe I did.
I remember seeing it. It was farther back. Well,
No, I don't think I have a wipe joint. Sorry.
yeah, oh well.
Maybe during the break, I will pull one up because I know I've got a million I don't have my computer connected. I'll still pull one up. We'll put it on there during the break.
Well,
show you
somebody
what a wipe
suggested
joint
if you
looks
put a
like.
magnet on steel, steel is magnetic, but lead's not.
Oh, that's one I've never tried.
Yeah,
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard about that.
I never heard about it till just now, but here it is in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good tip. Thank you. So one of the things we like to do, I talked about pressure. I'm holding a garden hose here, and we're opening the fixture very quickly. Now, I told you it's going to be the same PSI coming out immediately, but you've got so much friction that it can't maintain that water flow. So we open up the faucet, it's 80 PSI right at the end of that hose. So it comes out at 80 PSI. We've got a lot of water flowing out, but it can't maintain it. So then the water level just drops down very quickly. We'll show another example of that. We open the faucet real fast here, it comes out, and then it dips down. That's an issue with the water supply pipe. There's another one. Open up the full flow laundry faucet. We're opening the faucet all the way. Good pressure, it shoots up against the wall here, but it will not maintain that flow. And I'm not messing with the valves. This is seriously what it looks like. So that's a good tip off for you. All right, galvanized pipes, we all know what the issues are with those, right? They corrode on the inside, diameter gets smaller, you get galvanized coming in contact with other metals like copper. They're not supposed to be connected directly to each other. You get this galvanic reaction, and the galvanized piping is going to corrode. It's always going to be the worst at the threads because the threads are a much thinner point on the pipe. They actually remove some of the metal shavings to create those threads. So that's where it's thinnest. That's where it's most prone to leaking. And that's where it touches the other materials. So those are the areas where we pay the most attention to. If I'm at an old house and I see galvanized pipes coming in contact with copper, and it looks like it's been sitting there for 30 years, and there's no galvanic reaction and everything looks good, I don't write it in my report. I don't say, oh, there's an improper connection, galvanic reaction, blah, 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 blah. It's like, I'm looking for big, important stuff. It's been sitting there for 30 years. It's been fine. I ain't talking about it. If I see something that looks fairly new, yeah, I'm going to comment on it. Or if I see something like this, we'll talk about a galvanic reaction. And I don't know why this is leaking here. Doesn't this look like a brass fitting to you? Doesn't look like copper. You're supposed to be able to go from galvanized to brass. Why is it leaking? I don't know. I don't get into diagnosing exactly what's causing all this stuff. I'd say it's leaking. Have a plumber come out and fix it. Sometimes short and sweet is a lot better. What happened here? I don't know. We got some duct tape. Dare me to take it off? Y'all know what's going to happen if I take it off. It's going to leak like crazy. And then I made the leak.
A problem that we make sure it doesn't happen is when we're doing our final walkthrough and we're showing people, you know, here's what we've seen, you know, don't panic when you see it in the report. Don't let anybody touch those. They're nice and dry today. If you touch them, you're knocking the plug out
Yes.
and you're
yes.
about to get wet.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Don't ever touch stuff. I've learned that the hard way. Just look at it. The second you touch it, you even wipe your finger across it, you might cause it to leak. And I know that from experience. This is just some fun repairs, more fun repairs on galvanized pipes. Some of the worst PEX tubing installations I've ever seen right there. All kinds of hose clamps. Okay. We'll talk about cross connections a little bit. The whole reason we have a plumbing code is to make sure that we have clean, safe, potable water or drinking water. That's the reason we got a plumbing code. That's at the core of it. And so we got to talk about cross connections a little bit. This is just a quick little code definition of a cross connection. It basically means it's when bad water touches good water. And we want to do everything in our power to make sure that the two shall never touch each other. So the best way to do it is to have an air gap. It means that anytime you've got water entering a vessel, the water has to fall to get into that vessel. And there's no potential for the water inside this vessel to get so high that it touches our clean water. It's called an air gap. It's the surest way of protecting our potable water supply. Can't do it in every situation, but it's the best way. Even inside a toilet tank, we got one of those things. You've got this thing called an overflow tube inside of a toilet tank. That's as high as the water's ever going to go. Maybe if it's really coming out of there, maybe it could go like a quarter of an inch above here. But that's the spill line inside a toilet tank. And then the fill valve is always going to have this little embossed thing on here. It says CL. It's the critical level line on the fill valve. You pay attention to fill valves. You will find the critical level line on any one of them made within the last 30 years or so. And that's the point at which water leaves it. And that critical level line needs to be at least an inch above the top of the overflow tube. Doesn't matter what the water level is set at inside the tank. We just need to see critical level line 1 inch above the overflow. And that's what the code specifies, is that you always need a 1 inch air gap, or if you've got a really big opening, 2 times the opening. So if you've got like a 1 inch faucet, like a huge faucet opening, you'd have to have 2 times that 1 inch opening, like a 2 inch air gap. But in most cases, a 1 inch air gap is sufficient. That's what you need inside a toilet. Here's another example of it. There's a more common fill valve. This is the one made by Fluid Master. Their seal is right on this little embossed line. Now why am I talking about toilets? I'm not going to spend so much time about all the other stuff, but I want to just use this as an example. I think this is a great example because these little clamshell fill valves, these are no good. These sit at the bottom of the toilet tank. This is way below the fill line. These are not approved. We should not see those. So you have a potential cross connection inside a toilet tank. I've heard plumbers tell this old story about finding blue ice cubes in the fridge. Anybody ever heard about that? It's where you get a drop-in toilet tab where you get those blue tabs that they put in the toilet tank. It kind of cleans your toilet or whatever. And then at some point, you ended up having a cross connection inside of the toilet tank because the guts weren't installed properly and the ice maker kicked on at the same time. And it ended up sucking water out of the toilet tank and filling up the ice trays with blue toilet tank water. And then we get the blue ice cubes. I don't know if it's, like an old wives' tale or old plumber's tale or whatever, if this has really happened, but I did see my own version of this. one of the things we always look for during home inspections, we're looking inside the toilet tanks, making sure there's no cross connection. There was a bank-owned property, had been sitting vacant for a long time. Lifted up the tank on the toilet, and the water inside the tank is just black. It's like nobody has flushed this in a long time. And I noted that the fill valve was like basically buried in this black water. So get my camera out, take a picture of that, got a potential cross connection. And I was filling the bathtub as I'm doing this. We always like to fill the bathtubs to the overflow. If we have access to the overflow, make sure that there's no leaks behind there. So I'm filling the tub, I'm doing my thing around the rest of the bathroom as I'm waiting for the tub to fill. Flush the toilet, and I happen to look over at the bathtub as the toilet is flushing. All of a sudden, a big black slug of water comes out of the bathtub spout. I wasn't able to pull my camera out fast enough to get a picture of it coming out, but I did get a picture of that water making its way across the tub. You can see there's clean water at the far right side of this bathtub, and then it's black for a little while, and then it reverted back to clear water again by the time I was able to take my picture. But there's the one time I saw the water get sucked right out of the toilet tank and get into the bathtub. Now, as far as all the places where you could have a cross connection, a toilet tank is pretty innocuous. Usually, you're going to have fairly fresh, relatively clean water inside of a toilet tank. Not talking about the bowl. We're talking about the fill tank. It's not going to be that bad. A lot of the time, you can have a cross connection. You can have a little bit of that water go in your drinking water. You're not going to taste any difference. You're probably not going to get sick. But there's a ton of other places where you could get some really nasty water. You could have sewage getting into your water. You could have chemicals getting into your water. These are all the other places that are a lot more important for us home inspectors to look for cross connections. So thought we'd start with toilets, but we'll work on the more important stuff now. Anytime you've got a garden hose connection, you need to have something to protect that water. Now we got an air gap here, but if you connect a garden hose onto it, you lose your air gap. Who knows where the other end of that garden hose goes? So anytime you've got a garden hose thread, you're supposed to have a vacuum breaker. All right, so we talked about the wipe joints. There's a photo of a wipe joint. Can the people online see that, guys? Okay, oh, yep, there we go, okay. All right, so there's a wipe joint on a lead line. Here is another one. The lighting isn't quite right, but you get my point. You can see some of these little scratches on here. I think that was with my fingernail probably. Maybe I used a screwdriver, especially this one. Nice, big, shiny scratch going right across it. You can see what a contrast that is. Here's another one. There's another wipe joint. And, oh wait, that was the same one we just had. And there's another one. It's like this big ball of lead. That's a lead line. Okay, back to the presentation. I can find it. It's one of these here. Here we go. People online see it. Okay, we're good. So you got one of these guys. You need to have a vacuum breaker on the end of it. That's going to protect the city's water supply. It's this little device that screws on the end. Now in Minneapolis, if you don't have those and you're listing your house for sale, we make you fix it. You know, we do some of these city inspections. And I remember there was one where I was telling the guy, look, you got a laundry faucet, you got a threaded connection. That's a cross connection. He's like, well, what if it's not a threaded connection? Then do I pass my inspection? I'm like, well, yeah, I guess. So he goes and he gets his hacksaw. My clicker's not working. Comedy's all about timing. Timing was horrible there. So he gets his hacksaw and he fixed it in the middle of the inspection. He does not technically have a cross connection potential anymore. So he fixed it. He saved $3.95 by ruining his faucet. Good job. They've got these fancier ones too. These ones on the left, this is technically what the code specifies, but when we see the cheap ones, good enough, as long as we got something. But there's a lot of faucets out there today. I mean, the only faucets they've been installing in Minnesota for probably the last decade are these ones that have integral backflow prevention. It's already built into the faucet. You don't need an external device installed on the outside of it. And you can identify them. They got kind of this big, thick stem on here. On the side of the faucet, it actually has the words anti-siphon embossed on there. It has an ASSE standard embossed on the side of the faucet. It'll say ASSE 1019A, just like this says, ASSE 1019A. There's the standard stamped on there. And then usually they got these little orange tags that people don't remove when it's new construction. And then if it's the other style of faucet, where if it's a frost-free type of faucet, you usually see these little mushroom caps on top here. That's another indication that you have integral backflow prevention. You don't need another device threaded on the outside of the faucet. But when we see older faucets, and we don't see any of this, we recommend putting those vacuum breakers on. There's a cutaway showing one that's anti-siphon versus a standard faucet that's not. We all know what a frost-free faucet is. You guys are in a cold climate. You all know what they are? Yes? Yes. All right, good. Thank you. Appreciate it. I know I taught this class probably 4 or 5 years ago. So some of you may remember this slide. Is this a frost-free faucet? And if you're all shrugging going, I don't know, that's the correct answer. I don't know either. You only know if you're going to Google the model number, if you got the model number memorized of Woodford 101, if you got it memorized, you could figure out if it's frost-free or not. Or if you could see the whole thing, you could figure out if it's frost-free. Because if it's frost-free, it's going to have this big long stem that goes inside the house, right? Yeah, well, this one doesn't. This is not a frost-free faucet. So I used to look at the outsides of these faucets and I knew from 10 feet away whether it's frost-free or not until I didn't know. And I found out that they make devices that look identical to frost-free faucets that are not. So now I don't ever tell someone they've got a frost-free faucet. I tell them in the winter, it's a good idea to drain the water out of your outside faucets. It might be frost-free, might not be. You don't know. Here's another vacuum breaker, just great location for that. They knew the city inspector was coming, but this is useless. You can't connect a garden hose to that. This is a cross connection. The opening for this faucet is below the spill line. Now you might be thinking to yourself, but the spill line, that's right here. Here's the overflow. The overflow is not the spill line. If you get a clogged drain, that overflow does absolutely nothing. That's just connected to the sewer. You could have sewage coming out of that. So the overflow is the top of the tub. It's where the water is going to overflow. The faucet opening needs to be at least 1 inch above the top of that. And in this case, let's say it's a 1.5 inch faucet opening. How high above it should we have it? 2 times 1.5. Yeah, 2 times 1.5. So 3 inches above the opening or above the spill line. They got it right here. They replaced the old faucet with a big gooseneck thing that comes up and then points back down. This is a code compliant faucet. So they were able to fix it without replacing the tub. That's a good way to go. Something else they could have done is install dual inline check valves. You install one on the hot side, one on the cold side. This is going to prevent the water from going backwards. This is an acceptable repair too. So if I look at this, I can't say it's wrong. I can say it looks wrong, probably wrong, but I need to get at those water lines. I need to get behind it. If there's an access panel back there, I want to open it up before I say it's wrong, because how embarrassing is it for me if I call it out, say get a plumber out, and the plumber comes out and says, nope, it's fine, but that'll be $200 for me to show up at your house for the trip charge. And they're coming back to me saying, hey, you don't know what you're talking about, Reuben. So I do my best to try to look for hidden stuff like this too. These faucet openings are below the spill line. The spill line's right here. You can see I got a tape measure because it's a 1-inch tape measure. It should be at least to the top of the tape measure. That's a cross connection. Here, I just let the sink keep filling. You can see the water is actually touching the faucet spout. Cleared cross connection there. Here's a good way to fix it on those 2-handle faucets where you got the hot on one side, cold on the other. You replace one side with the 2-handle faucet, and then on the other side, you install a soap dispenser. Great way of doing it. How do you fix this? Dual inline check valves. Yep, that's right. Yep, just like that. Hand showers sitting in tub water, that's a non-issue. Every hand shower I have ever looked at, all of them have a backflow prevention standard. Not an issue. Got nothing to do about that. That's fine. Got the same thing on dishwashers. Every dishwasher manufacturer is going to tell you need an air gap on the discharge hose. Or if you're not going to have an air gap, meaning this big ugly thing that breaks the surface of your kitchen sink and spews water when it clogs, and well, you can tell I like them. Your dishwasher manufacturer will tell you if you're not going to have this thing that actually goes up above the counter, you could install a high loop, and it's going to look like this. It's going to be where the drain line connects all the way up. All right, what we're seeing here is the discharge for a water softener. It's going to a floor drain, and they've created an air gap. They made a little gooseneck with this thing so that the water falls before it gets into the floor drain. This is a proper installation. This looks good. This is a manufactured device that creates an air gap for a water softener discharge hose. They sell these. I've never actually seen one in person. Just pulled this off the internet. This is another common way of doing it. If you have a water softener discharging into a laundry sink, you could just have a pipe attached to the wall, and the pipe terminates at least 1.5 inches above the laundry sink that it's discharging into. That's a nice air gap. If you've got a boiler, you guys surely got tons of boilers in your area. The water feed line on the boiler needs some type of mechanical protection to prevent the water in the boiler from backfeeding into the house if there's ever an imbalance in pressure. And a common way of doing it would be one of these guys. This is a dual check valve with an intermediate atmospheric vent, also called a DCV-IAV, dual check valve, intermediate atmospheric vent. It's basically a fail-safe device. Even if the check on this side gets fouled and this check gets fouled and they're both all screwed up, even if there's back pressure, it's not going to make its way back into the boiler system. It's just going to leak out of the vent. That's one way of dealing with it. This is what it looks like when it's installed. This is not a discharge tube. You don't need to have a pipe coming out of here and discharging to a safe location. The manufacturers tell you if it does leak and it's going to cause damage where it leaks, then you can attach a pipe to it and route it to a safe location where it won't cause damage. Like if it's directly above a boiler, you don't want water leaking on top of your boiler and causing it to rust. Maybe you'd have a little pipe going over, but for the most part, you never need any piping attached to these. They're fine just the way they are. Okay, that's all I got on cross connections. Now we're going to talk about venting and S-traps. I love this product because the guy on the cover is installing an S-trap. And it says right on here, it's kind of tough to read. It says, be your own plumber and violate the plumbing code and do all kinds of stuff that you shouldn't be doing. Now, let's talk about why S-traps are a problem. It all goes back to venting. Plumbing fixtures are supposed to have vents, and the purpose of a vent is to help allow air in to replace the water as it drains. You can't have nothing in the pipe. When all the water's gone, it needs to be replaced with something. And we want to replace it with air. We don't want water going back in to backfill it. So here's a cutaway. I'm sure we all understand this. We all got a good idea of how this works. You've got a trap, the drain line comes over, and then you've got a vent going up, you got the drain going down. On the toilet, you've got a vent for the toilet too. All these plumbing fixtures have a vent. They have a way to allow air in to replace water as it drains. So we'll come back to that in a sec here, but here's our standard P trap. It looks like a P. You turn it on its side, you got the letter P. Now, if we do this, is this still a P trap? I don't know. I don't like arguing semantics with other home inspectors. But I can tell you, it ain't properly vented. That's for sure. There is no vent here. The water comes down, it comes over, and then it goes down again. If you have a vent, you're going to have a pipe coming up. Maybe there's a vent somewhere down here, but it ain't right. If you have a vent that's proper, the top of the trap, also known as the weir, wherever the water sits, the water line will be right here. This top of the water needs to look over and it needs to be able to see air somewhere over here. If you have a pipe that comes down, it can't see the air. So this is not properly vented. I can tell you that for sure. Now, oh, I forgot I had a diagram. This is what I was trying to clumsily explain with words. The top of the weir, if we look over, it needs to be able to see air. This is good. This is why we have maximum trap arm lengths. The maximum length you can have on a trap arm is dependent on the size of the pipe. If you've got a very small pipe, you can have a trap arm that's about this long. If you have a big pipe, you can have a trap arm that's this long. It's because you have that much more height for it to see the air at the vent. That's why we have sanitary tees. A sanitary tee is a fitting that's good for a trap arm going into a drain and a vent connection. If you have this combo fitting here on the left, or it could also be a Y fitting, the air does not get to see the top of the weir. This is an improper fitting. You should never see this on a trap arm. It's all about having your fixtures get properly vented. So now this, is this a P trap? I'd say no, this is clearly an S trap. And whether these fixtures are S traps or not, again, it's not properly vented. Now we go back to that little video I showed you of the S trap where the water is going through there the P trap, where I had the clear P trap and the water was going through there very quickly. It's scouring the water through there very fast. It's because these fixtures are designed, they're super smooth. They're designed to have the water go gently through them. It goes very quickly. When you take another one and you put it upside down on top of the first one, water is going to go through that very quickly. Now, if you were to extend that trap arm, the water's not going to drain through there quite as fast. It's going to slow it down a little bit. But you put them together, water really goes through there quickly. So you got water going down, it comes up, it goes back down again. All that water is going to, let's say it's going to drain another story or two. And as all that water is leaving, what replaces the water in the pipe? Because remember, you can't have nothing. Yeah, it's got to be air. It gets replaced with air. Where does it get its air? Yeah, gets its air from up here. How does the air get from here to here? It goes through the trap. That's called trap siphoning. It means it's pulling a bunch of air and a bunch of water through the trap. That's why we can't have S traps. That's why they're prohibited by code today. That's why we need plumbing vents. The job of a plumbing vent is to protect our traps. Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. There's the question. Here's the plumbing code definition. Don't take my word for it, is my point here. The plumbing system shall be provided, blah, 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 so that the liquid seal of any fixture trap shall not be subjected to a pressure differential of more than 1 inch of water column. Okay, let me rephrase that. We need vents to protect our traps. That's it. I'm gonna skip ahead a little. I've done my own testing on it. You definitely can suck enough water out of here to drain so much water that we lose our trap seal. I ended up, this is backyard testing here. I just filled up a 5-gallon bucket with water. I let the water drain. When it was all done, I hold my flashlight behind the trap. All these traps are kind of translucent. You can see it sucked so much water out of here that we've lost our trap seal. Now sewer gas has the potential to get back into the house. Here's a side-by-side comparison now, because back in the day, I used to tell people you need vents to help things drain properly. You take a water bottle and you dump it upside down and the water is going to gurgle out. But then you punch a hole in the top of the bottle, it's going to drain really fast. That's why we need plumbing vents. That was a horrible analogy. I had no idea what I was talking about. I just repeated what somebody before me had explained to me. That's what I was told. That's why we need vents. It's to help things drain properly. That's utter nonsense. Let me show you. Here's a quick little video. I've got a few videos to show you here. We'll start with this first one. I'm letting my sink drain, and it's all properly installed. Everything's good. Here's what it sounds like. Oh, let's go back. Come on. Oh, I'm going to be really frustrated if these videos don't work. Because they're great. All right. Can we have sound? Sad. Okay. Well, I'll just have to talk you through it. It's just not the same. All right, the water drains out. It's all happy. It's all good. And then I do it again. And on the second test, what I've done is I have blocked off the vent. I went underneath my kitchen sink. I cut my vent and I put a cap on there. And I redid the test. And on the second one, you hear this loud slurping sound. It's like it's sucking, it's whining through there. And it drains way faster. Why is it draining faster without a vent? It's because it's sucking. It's because all that water that is now drained down a full story is pulling the rest of the water out. It actually drains faster when there's no vent. All right, I've got more video here, and I'm just going to have to talk through it. I'm basically explaining the same thing that I've just been telling you guys, that the purpose of a vent is to protect our trap seals. Now look at this water bottle here. I've got the drain open. You see that? It's open. Water should be draining out of here, right? It's not draining out because there's no air being allowed back in. It can't drain out. I've got a little toothpick stuck in here. I've got a hole in there. As soon as I take that toothpick out, it's going to drain just fine. Watch this. Hold the toothpick. Come on. Water comes out. Okay. Now, that has nothing to do with the plumbing fixture. If this were a sink, the sink would be the top of that water bottle. And it would be sliced in half, and it would be wide open. Actually, let's smash cut to the next scene, because that's exactly what I have. Let's do it again. Okay, now it's wide open. I'm going to fill it. That's your sink. Where would you ever have a sink that's completely sealed? Never. That's the answer. So this has nothing to do with the plumbing fixture. Every time we give that stupid analogy about a water bottle and all that, we're describing something that doesn't exist in a house. So let's do some more testing on this. What I've got is a trap. and I let the water drain through the trap. I repeat the test a few times. It sucks without volume, but you get the gist of this. I repeat the test a few times. The water always drains faster when it's not vented, because all the water that's leaving is pulling water through. A vent actually makes things drain slower, but it protects the trap. And in the video here, we end up losing a bunch of water when I cap the vent off with my finger. But when we do it again and I leave the vent open, the water level remains perfectly even. Why? Because the vent protects our trap seals. And then I did it again. I made another video, had my son help me with this one, because I made that first video, and I've got a YouTube channel and I put all this stuff online, and I had a bunch of people complain saying, well, that's not an accurate test you did. You're using these tiny little pipes and they don't behave the same way that a full-size pipe is going to behave. So I said, all right, we'll do it again. And I did it again. That's where I was using that clear trap that I showed at the beginning of the plumbing section here, which feels like 2 days ago. So I got my son helping me. We pull the drain stopper, but then I did it again, and I got the videos side to side. I do it again, but this time I have an unvented drain. I've capped off the vent, and we timed it. I had the water at the exact same level. We timed the two, and I'm going to put the two videos side by side. He pulls the stoppers at the same time. Now, on the vented one on the left here, you can see the water is going through there. It's fine, but unvented, like it's turbulently going through here. Like it is really sucking. And it finishes draining quite a bit faster than the vented one. And if we were to slow it down, we'd see that a bunch of water ended up getting sucked out of the trap on the right side. But look what happens. We're not missing any water there. Why are we not missing any water? Why didn't it all get sucked out? It's because the sink has a very flat bottom, and it takes a while for the rest of the water in the sink to finish draining. So even though we kind of lost our trap seal for a split second or two there, the rest of the water in the sink was able to refill my trap. So it really didn't make any difference. Now, if I had a sink, this is distracting now. If I had a sink that was shaped like a V and all of the water drained out of the sink super quickly, all at once, I'd probably lose my trap seal and it'd be gone. But because most sinks are going to be fairly flat on the bottom, we kind of lose our trap seal for a quick second, and then the rest of the water draining out of the fixture fills it back up again. So, what if I had an S trap? What do I say? I say this isn't technically correct. It increases the potential for losing our trap seal. And on every one of those fixtures, I'll do kind of a similar test that I just did here. I will fill the fixture up with water. I'll let it drain. I'll listen. I'll listen for gurgling and sucking and air bubbles going through. And then I'll usually put my flashlight on the backside of the translucent plastic trap. And I'll look to see where the water level is. And if we've actually lost the trap seal, I'll say, we got a problem. We need to get a plumber fix this. But I don't usually find that. Usually what I find is the fixture drains so slowly at the end, it refills it. I look at the backside and I say, it refilled itself. It's technically improper. Maybe someday you're going to want to have somebody do something about it, or if you have the house remodeled, plumber's going to need to fix it at that point. But for today, it is what it is. Don't make any big deal about it. Bob.
You talk about listening. Oftentimes in old houses, if I flush the toilet, the shower will gurgle.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's a
again,
venting problem.
it's a venting problem.
The
But
toilet is using the shower to replace the water. Yep. Good point. I've got an awesome video. I've got a compilation of new construction defects that we found over the last year, and I'll be posting it on Tuesday, where we were draining bathtubs and showers and whatnot, and you go to the toilet, and you open the lid on the toilet, you can just see air getting sucked into the toilet constantly. It's delightful. And it's pretty much the same thing you just described, just a different fixture. All right, so we talked a lot about vents. We all know what vents are for now. They don't help things drain any better. They protect our trap seals. So if you do want to put a vent in, how do you do it? Well, you can go through the roof. That can be extremely expensive when you're looking at, say, a basement bathroom where they didn't vent any of the fixtures. Show of hands, are air admittance valves allowed in your area? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so at least some people's areas allow air admittance valves. It's these things that allow air in to replace water, but they don't allow sewer gas to come back out. And there's something that looks a lot like an air admittance valve. It's called a check vent. It's like this $2 thing that they use on manufactured houses. Not the same thing as an air admittance valve, but it kind of does the same thing. We should never see those in a single family home. You should never see those in a residential setting. That's what I'm showing you there. That's a check vent. In Minnesota, we can't use any of these things. I mean, a more general term for all this is a mechanical vent. They just don't allow them in Minnesota, period. So when I come across them, how do I report on them? Kind of the same way I do S-traps. I say it's not technically right, but I'm a fan of these. I love them. Oh, and there's a close-up difference. The one on the left here, air admittance valve. It's got this ESR standard stamped on there and all that. The check vent, it's got this little cheesy spring in there. Check vents cost about $3. Air admittance valves cost about 20 or 30 bucks. And there's just some diagrams showing you can put them all over the house. This video is not at all the same without volume. I might show it anyway, but I've done a bunch of testing on these air admittance valve to show how they work because, like I said, they're not allowed in Minnesota. But what's the real issue? I mean, if they're not allowed by my plumbing code, if I'm going to write it up in a home inspection report, I want to know what the issue is. Besides, it doesn't meet code. I mean, that should never be a reason we put stuff in our inspection reports. I firmly believe home inspectors ought to know their codes, but you shouldn't report on codes. It's a lazy way of reporting. You should report on why it matters, not what the code says. So if I'm going to report on this, I want to know what the issue is. And I've heard that they can be noisy, and I've heard that if you have sewage backs up, that they can actually discharge water. And I've heard that they can fail. I've heard all these different stories. So I bought a whole bunch of them and I installed them all over my house, and I did every test imaginable with these things. And I couldn't get them to leak. And at the end of this, I think it's just a little bit of blooper testing because I was trying to fill this thing up with air, and I could not. Let's see. Yeah, we'll skip to the end here. I was trying to fill this thing up with air to see how much pressure it would take, and I was doing it wrong with my air compressor, and it's leaking, and I tried shutting it off, and I made it explode, and it ended up happening to me over and over again. I just about lost an eye trying to test this stuff, but in the end, it passed all of my testing. There's nothing wrong with these things. So, huge fan of those air admittance valves. Yeah, it just kept exploding. Good stuff. All right. A few miscellaneous old house doohickeys. This would be a breather valve on a gas meter. You've got a gas meter inside the house. All of those things have a regulator on them, and they need to burp air. And you don't want it burping air, or gas, I should say, to the inside of the house. So you'd always have a little pipe coming off the regulator. It comes through the outside of the house, and then it burps its air to the exterior. That's all it is. There's nothing that needs to be done about these, but your clients will ask you about them. This guy, a lot of the time when you got this pipe coming through the foundation wall, people will confuse this with a buried fuel oil tank. They'll say, is there an oil tank somewhere in the house? The way to know the difference usually is looking for a gas meter. If you've got a relatively new gas meter with a high pressure gas line, somewhere in the vicinity of this old capped off pipe, this is probably an old gas line, like natural gas coming into the house, and they've converted the system over to a high pressure system, and they just capped it off. We'll talk about fuel oil tanks in a minute here. This guy, 4-inch pipe coming out of the ground, kind of close to the house. This would be a rain leader. We would have a lot of old houses where they had these big pipes that went down underneath the house into the basement, and then they would connect to a cistern, a big holding tank that would collect rainwater, and then they would have a pump installed in there, and you could pump water out, and you could water your lawn or your garden or use it for whatever. Just, it wouldn't be potable water, but you could use it for a lot of other things. They're no longer allowed. A lot of these would end up connecting to the city's sewer system too. They would actually take rainwater and connect to the sewer system. They don't allow that to be done in the Twin Cities either. And anytime we got these, they're always supposed to be covered over, capped off permanently. This one, they just had a rock sitting on top of it. I'm the one who took the rock off to take the picture. But that's those old pipes. That's what it looks like when it's properly plugged off. There's another example of it where they plugged it over with concrete. There's a little diagram of what it would look like. We've got the cistern in the basement. We got a pressure tank, and then it would go throughout the rest of the, well, it would go typically to the outside of the house. Here's an example of what those cisterns look like. And from a home inspection perspective, when we come across these, a lot of the time we get clients who freak out about these. Like, what do I do? Do I got to get it abated? Do I got to get some specialists to come out here? You don't need to do anything. It doesn't pose any risk. There's no hazard. I mean, you know, if you got kids playing around in the basement and it's filled with a bunch of, like, you know, sharp, rusty nails going through 2x4s, okay, clean it out of there. But the cistern itself, there is no environmental hazard. There's nothing to be done about it. It is what it is. It's pretty innocuous. There's another example of a cistern. That's a twisted cistern. Couldn't help myself, sorry. There's the inside of one. There's the inside of another one. Again, nothing needs to be done. There's the boards and a bunch of nails coming out of them and whatnot. Like, yeah, if your kids are going to play in there, do something about it. Maybe block it off. That's all. This guy's a coal chute. Why do we care about those? We really don't. The only thing I'd say about it is it sealed off? I mean, do we have drafts coming in? Can some hobo open it up and crawl into the basement? Is this an access point? After that, I really don't care. That's about it. Fuel oil tanks. You guys just had somebody out, what, like a week or two ago that spoke at one of your Wednesday meetings, right? Okay, yeah, for OMG. Talked a lot about fuel oil tanks. It was a great recording. I watched the whole thing. Hollis was kind enough to send that over to me. I'm not going to be stepping on anybody's toes when it comes to fuel oil tanks. I'm not covering the same content. A lot of that class was talking about what legally needs to be done when you find a fuel oil tank when it's not in service. Basically, the way it works in your area, in my area, as far as I know, everywhere in the country, is that fuel oil tanks are fine as long as they are in service and they're not leaking. You can check those two boxes, you got nothing to worry about. Pretty easy for us to figure out if a fuel oil tank is in service, right? I mean, you better be able to figure that one out. Number two, is it leaking? That's where it gets challenging. If you got an underground tank, how in the world are you going to know if it's leaking? You got to call out a professional. I'd say anytime you've got a buried tank, it's a good idea to recommend somebody come out and test it for leaking. If you've got an above ground tank, a lot of signs, a lot of clues you can look for that I'm not going to get into, but you want to make sure it's not leaking. I don't have a ton of experience on active tanks. We've got a ton of abandoned tanks in my area. And really what I'm focusing on is just trying to figure out, does the house you're inspecting have an abandoned, buried fuel oil tank? That's the biggest thing I'm thinking about. Because if it does, someone's going to need to do something about it. So one big tip off is these pipes coming out of the ground. You got the fill pipe on the right side, you got the vent on the left side. Usually when they're right next to each other against the house, it's going to be one of three things. Number one, you got a tank in the basement. That's certainly the most common one. Number two, you've got a tank underneath the house. I think I've seen that twice in my entire home inspection career. Number three, you had a tank and some hack came in and removed the tank and they left the fill pipes in place. Fill pipes always need to be removed, cut off, filled with concrete anytime that tank is taken out. And the reason is you don't want a delivery company coming to the wrong house and fill in the basement with fuel oil. There's an old school guy in my area where I had him on my podcast, and he said when he used to work for the oil company, that would happen approximately once a year, where they would go to the wrong house, fill it with fuel oil, and then the oil company would need to buy the house, demolish it, and pull out the foundation. That's how nasty that oil was. There was no fixing it. When you got pipes separated from each other like this, you got a vent pipe right against the house, you got a fill pipe out here, buried tank. Yeah, I don't know of any exception to that. It's pretty much a guarantee that you're gonna have a buried tank. What if you can't find the fill pipe? Tell someone else to look for it. When they're separated away from the house like this is not butted right up against the house. It's about, 1.5 feet, 2 feet away from the house. Buried tank. There's a tank in the yard here. When they're like this, you got one pipe right next to the house, one out in the yard here. Yep, buried tank again. This is the scar they left in the yard after they removed the tank. For the presenter you guys had, he said they typically come in 500 to 1,000 gallon sizes. In my area, it's almost all 1,000 gallon tanks that get buried in the yard. Anybody see the pipes here? I can see one of them. There's one pipe right here. I think there's another one here. They're not easy to spot. Oh yeah, there we go. There's a little closer look. There's the two pipes. It can be easily hidden by vegetation. How about this one? Look at that. We got a fill pipe. It's kind of behind the bush, half buried in snow. This is why home inspection standards of practice say that home inspectors are not required for reporting on any of this stuff. And I mean, I know I'm talking about all this stuff, and our standard of practice says you don't need to report on it, but I don't think there's a single person in the room who's going to see this stuff and not say something about it. I mean, if you're buying a house, would you want someone to tell you about this? Of course you would. And that's why we report on this, even though our standard of practice doesn't mandate we do it. Big firm believer in going above and beyond anytime you can for your clients. So yeah, this is kind of half buried in snow. Here's another one. You see, look at that, kind of buried behind the bushes. You're going to miss them sometimes. You're not going to catch every one, but do what you can to find them. There's a vent. That's a nice subtle clue that there's a buried tank here. Another subtle clue was the spray paint in the driveway that said tank. It's another giveaway that there might be a buried tank there. And then, of course, you got the interior tanks. And if they're abandoned, someone ought to do something with it. Remove it. That's the solution there. Or you can paint it up like cows and just call it decor. Another home inspector sent this to me. I got to give credit. I don't remember who it was, but up until now, every single photo you've seen, I took myself. This is the first one I'm sharing with you. I did not take this one. And this is not a Minnesota. I took that one. You could use it to decorate your yard. It's always classy. I'm sure the neighbors appreciate that. There's another one. They look like cows. There's one of the buried tanks I found underneath the house. You can see you got the fill pipe and the vent pipe coming through the house. They come down here, and then this was an access cover to it. I have no idea what was underneath there. I made no attempt to get that cover off. Just said, you clearly have a tank underneath the house. And then this video is not going to work without sound. But if you want to figure out whether you have a buried tank or not, I mean, I suppose you could just refer to a professional. It's always the right thing to do. You say, hey, we got these pipes coming out of the ground. I think there's a buried fuel oil tank. Call Joe's tank service and have someone verify it. That's kind of our standard report comment. But if you want to go a little bit further, I would always refer to this guy and he, he's the expert in my area. And then finally I said, so Dean, what do you do to verify there's a tank? You got like a tank locator 3000 or something? You scan the ground, it tells you there's a tank there. He goes, oh yeah. I use a wrench. Basically, you put your ear to one pipe and you bang on the other pipe. And you can hear it really clearly. You can hear this loud echo. And that's what my video shows. And you can hear it in the video when it's working. But we're just banging on one pipe and you can hear a very loud echo on the other. That's a really great dead giveaway that you have a tank. It's just listening to it.
That's not gonna work very well if the tank's full of oil, though, is it?
If the tank's full of oil,
If the tank's
you're gonna hear something, I'm sure. Yeah, it's worked on every one we've ever tried. Now, if it's completely filled to the brim, I suppose not, but who's gonna abandon a system right when it's filled to the brim? And then this one, it's the same thing. I got one of my inspectors going down, he's just kind of knocking on it. And you can hear a loud echo every time he hits it. Good way to distinguish between just some random pipe in the yard and a fuel oil tank. Gives you a lot more sense of assurance. And there he's sniffing the other pipe. Good times. That's what the tanks look like. That's a 1,000 gallon tank. They do come bigger though. That's bigger than 1,000. I don't know how big that one is. That was a commercial building. This is a tank coming out of a school. They get massive. I saw I was walking around the building before class started. They had a big placard on the side of the building here saying they had a 10,000 gallon fuel oil tank. They get big. Okay. Next topic, asbestos. Another topic we don't need to report on as home inspectors. But there's a lot of things that I would talk about. If I see it, I'm going to say something. Now, sometimes we'll have clients go up to us and we'll say, hey, I want you to check for asbestos. Can you do asbestos testing? What do you mean? What do you want tested? Well, we just want to make sure the home doesn't have asbestos. I've heard that's bad. We had a specialist come out, industrial hygienist come out to talk to our local chapter about asbestos. And by the time he was done, I realized he could have really shortened his whole speech by just saying if a material is not made out of wood or metal, it might contain asbestos. There are thousands, literally thousands of products that have been put in houses that may contain asbestos. So I'm talking like ceiling tiles and vinyl floor coverings and the adhesive used for vinyl and gyp drywall and drywall tape and drywall mud and insulation on wires and everything you could possibly think of that's not made out of metal or wood could contain asbestos. That's a nice summary. But there's a few areas where it's particularly problematic or it's things where if I were buying a house I'd want to know about. That's the stuff we talk about. So we kindly tell our clients, no, we will not test for asbestos. There's too many places it could be. In most cases, it doesn't present any type of hazard. If it's the big bad stuff, we'll do a good job of telling you about it. At least we'll try, even though our standard of practice says we don't have to. This is all a bonus. Don't want to give you the idea I'm testing for it. I'm going to guarantee that I'm finding it. But if I see it, I'll say something. Number one, boiler pipes. You got insulated boiler pipes. You got this white fibrous stuff going around the outside of the pipe. Usually contains asbestos. A good tip-off would be the word asbestos printed on the original installation tag. That should give you a pretty good confidence level in calling it asbestos-containing material. Or a big warning tag on it, contains asbestos fibers. Yeah, it probably contains asbestos. Now, if I saw this stuff, this all looks like it's in great shape. I mean, I'll tell my clients, don't mess with it, but it's not going to become airborne. It's not loose. It's not easily damaged. The technical industry term for that is friable. It's not friable. This all looks fine. I'd have nothing to say about it, but I still would make a note about it in my report. Now, if it looks like this, I'd be a lot more aggressive. Can you guys see it? I know the lighting's not great in here, but this door rubs on this insulation. Right when I walked into the room, I opened the door and it rubs on all of this. And I'm looking around, and later on I look up, I'm like, oh, great, that's what I'm breathing. I need hazard pay today. Yeah, this is friable. Every time that door opens and closes, we're going to be releasing little fibers into the air. I'd say this needs attention. And my recommendation would be get an asbestos contractor out here to have it removed or encapsulated. Short and sweet. Water pipe insulation, every once in a blue moon, we'll see stuff that looks like asbestos. Do I say it contains asbestos? No, I'm not testing for asbestos. I say this is a known asbestos-containing material. I think that's a really good phrase to use in your inspection reports. It's a known asbestos-containing material. I'm not painting myself into a corner. I'm leaving the potential that I could be wrong. I'm not doing lab testing, but I'm pretty sure. I've never been called out on that. 9x9 floor tiles surely contain asbestos. That's a good way to know. Another good way to know is if you have a box laying around that says asbestos tiles. It's another good indicator. 12x12 tiles? Maybe. I used to tell people when they quit using 9x9 tiles and they went to 12x12, that's when they stopped adding asbestos. I was wrong. I got, the guy teaching our class said that's not true at all. They still have a bunch of 12x12 tiles that contain asbestos. So why do we care? I've had our company, our asbestos testing company, the people we refer, they've done a lot of testing on it. And they said they have never found asbestos fibers in the air at any of these houses. The asbestos fibers are very well entrained in the tiles and in the glue. It would take an act of God for these materials to become airborne. They are not friable. These are never friable. Even if you punch holes in it or whatever, you're not going to release fibers into the air. So why does anybody care? Why do we even mention it to our clients? It's because big box retailers care about this. And if your client is going to hire Home Depot to come out and install carpet over their 9x9 floor tiles in the basement, Home Depot won't touch it. And they're going to say, nope, these have asbestos. You got to do something about it. I can't touch it. Oh, and your home inspector should have told you this. So I don't want that coming back to me. So when we find 9x9 floor tiles, we tell our clients they likely contain asbestos, not a health hazard, but if you're going to have new floor covering installed, a lot of retailers don't want to mess with it. And they want it covered over or removed before you do anything. That's the only reason we mention it. Not concerned about a hazard. Same thing kind of goes for cement asbestos siding. People don't like messing with it. Doesn't present a hazard. I don't know why it is, but insurance companies don't like this stuff either. Got a hand in the back, you got a mic, you're all set to go.
What about when it's cut or building? The asbestos siding especially, but also, floor tile when it's being removed, is that not getting the asbestos?
Oh, so his
I'm
mic's
sorry.
not on. It's okay. I can repeat it. So the question is, what about floor tile when you're removing it? No concern. Now, personally, if I'm going to remove floor tile, I'm going to get it all wet and I'm still going to wear a respirator just in case. I mean, I would treat it as though it is going to become airborne. I'm not going to mess with this stuff. Not going to put my health at risk, but normal day-to-day stuff, zero concern.
And the siding, when it's being drilled or?
You know, I suppose if you took a sander to the siding or an angle grinder, maybe. I can't tell you categorically that it's not going to cause a problem. I'm telling you that I don't have any concern with living in a house that has it. If you're working on it, you know, I'm sure you have the potential to make it airborne. But I would never call this stuff friable, where it's going to release fibers with day-to-day use. A few more examples of it. Insulation going around the outside of a gravity furnace. And when it all looks pristine, it all looks good. I tell my clients, this is a known asbestos-containing material. And someday when you replace this furnace, which is probably going to be really soon, these things are all dinosaurs, it's going to cost you a lot more money to replace it. Because you need to hire an abatement contractor to come in, tent off the whole room, dismantle this whole thing, safely remove all of that, and then you can have a company come in and put it in your new furnace. Same thing goes with old boilers that are all wrapped with asbestos. It's going to cost a lot more money to replace it. Am I concerned about the fibers getting released into the air? Not really. I mean, maybe if you've got paper that's just hanging down and someone's going to touch it, okay, sure. I mean, we always talk about it, but the biggest reason I report on it's going to increase the replacement cost for those appliances. Another place we find it is on subslab ductwork. I think that's a good technical name for it. At some point in the Twin Cities, people started calling this stuff, oh gosh, come on, what's it called? Transite, thank you, thank you. It just escaped me. They started calling this transite heat. That's a horrible name for this because it's all subslab ductwork, but only a small fraction of it actually contains transite. Transite is a cement asbestos product. It was made right around the 50s or so. And for a little while, they're using it as the ductwork underneath houses. Now, this stuff is not easily airborne. There's not much a duct cleaning company could even do to cause it to become airborne. It's usually in good shape. The only reason I care about subslab ductwork is about water coming in. And you can see here, you've got some clear stains on here, right here. I mean, there's the high level watermark. There's been water in here. And I don't care what the subslab ductwork is made out of, whether it's transite or PVC. We're taking a flashlight and a mirror, and we're taking the vent covers off, like I showed a couple slides ago. My inspectors are required to remove every single vent cover you can possibly access. Take it off, get a flashlight, get a mirror, look down it both ways, look for any signs of water, because you got water in there or past water signs in there, kind of a big deal. There's the outside of it.
Because of mold?
Because of mold, indoor air quality issues, and because of how difficult it is to fix the water coming in. There's usually no simple fix for this. Almost every time you got water coming into subslab ductwork, the fix means abandoning that ductwork and running new ductwork above it and sealing off the subslab ductwork. It is a big deal. There's standing water in the ductwork. I got my tape measure sticking in there. You can see there's probably about 3 to 4 inches of standing water there. I don't know how this ever happened, but we've seen a handful of houses where they had steel ductwork buried below the slab. And it does exactly what you think steel is going to do when it's sitting in dirt. I don't need to connect the dots. Other stuff we find in subslab ductwork, we got some dead rodents in there. Good times. So on the topic of transite, for a while, transite was used for furnace vents too. Anybody ever see any gas vents with transite? Does that ever happen in your area? I see a few hands, so we'll talk about it. If I saw no hands, I'd just skip over it. The concern with this stuff is that it starts to flake apart on the inside. Flue gases are very corrosive, and when flue gases condense, and oh man, we're going to talk a lot about that when we get to chimneys shortly here. When flue gases condense, they tear up concrete. They tear up masonry products. They're very corrosive. And that's what happens on these transite asbestos flues. When you get condensation, the things just start falling apart. They flake apart like a pastry. And eventually the inside of the flue collapses in on itself and it completely blocks the flue. So anytime we see a transite vent used to vent gas appliances, I'm concerned about it. At best, if it all looks pristine, I say this is suspect. But I'm doing whatever I can to get on the roof, take the vent cap off. Yeah, I take a couple screws out. No, I'm not licensed to do it. And no, I don't care. I'm going to take that vent cap off, look down the flue, make sure this all looks pristine. That's a serious safety hazard. That flue is in danger of getting completely blocked over by that thing collapsing in on itself. And once that happens, whatever's venting into there is going to backdraft into the house. That's definitely a thing. This is what it looks like on the outside. This is a transite asbestos flue. We got the metal vent connectors entering it, and then it's transite going up through the middle of the house. If this is the same one, what's the fix? What do we do about it? Do we need to get an abatement contractor out to safely remove all of this? No. You can just abandon it in place. They can have it capped off. It's not causing any harm, but you need to vent the appliances out of the house. How do you do that? There's no easy way to do it. I'd say if you've got a furnace venting into here like this, one of these pipes, this first one here, this is surely the furnace, you'd end up having to replace that furnace with a high efficiency furnace that vents out the side. Then the water heater, install a power vent or install an electric water heater. That's your fix there. It's probably going to be more cost effective than trying to replace this vent that passes through finished spaces all through the inside of the house. So it's a big deal. Here's another one, flaking apart. There's another one. Here's one. Here's what it looks like when it passes through the attic. And then finally, and so what's our concern with asbestos there? Nothing.
In our area, we have a lot of oil, and oil is just as corrosive and actually leaves more stuff behind than gas.
Oh, good to know. Okay.
Because you'll see yellow around fixtures and things like that.
Interesting. Okay. I'll admit, I've inspected 2 houses that had oil in my entire life. So I'm sure you guys can tell me a lot about oil. My knowledge level is that much. So vermiculite, that's the big bad one. That's the one we really care about. My thing with vermiculite, I mean, ever since I got into home inspections, gosh, 25 years ago, I'd always tell people, oh, vermiculite, yeah, it may contain asbestos. The only way to know is to get lab testing. You need to get lab testing on it. And then my clients would get lab testing on this. Oh, let me back up. Just, there could be some rookies in the room. This pink fluffy stuff, that's loose fill fiberglass insulation. This shiny light stuff underneath it, very, very small, that's vermiculite. Contains, it's another name is expanded mica. A brand name is going to be, oh gosh, I forgot the brand name. I'll get to it. Zonalite. Yeah, zonalite. But the generic name for it is vermiculite. This stuff surely contains asbestos. And I used to tell people you need to get it tested, and people would test for it. They'd send it off to a lab, and it would always come back as does not contain asbestos. Never had a single client test it and come back positive for asbestos. So I started, kind of not making that big of a deal about it. I'd be like, it might contain asbestos. You could test for it. Probably doesn't, but check it out. And then the Zonalite Attic Insulation Trust happened. Zonalite was this huge manufacturer of vermiculite insulation. They got just about all of their products from a mine in Libby, Montana, and it contained a ton of asbestos, and it was some of the worst type of asbestos you could possibly have. The stuff was easily airborne. Basically, if you sneezed near this material, the asbestos fibers would become airborne and they'd stay airborne for like days. It was really nasty stuff. And there was this class action lawsuit against Zonalite. They lost, and it was one of the biggest payouts that ever happened. And then they were financially responsible for spreading the news about this and trying to educate homeowners about what this could mean to them and how they could distribute funds from this trust to get it into the hands of homeowners that had vermiculite insulation, specifically Zonalite insulation in their attics. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but somewhere around 90 to 95% of all the vermiculite out there came from this one mine in Libby, Montana. So it's super nasty stuff. And just because let me back up. Just because you look in an attic and you see that the attic is insulated with fiberglass insulation or whatever it is, don't assume that that's what it is all the way down to the ceiling. I have never inspected a house that had vermiculite insulation and just gone in the attic and seen vermiculite. It has always been covered with some other material, 100% of the time. Does your home inspection standard of practice require you to remove or even disturb insulation? No, our standards don't. Are you going to miss stuff if you choose to follow your standards to a T? Heck yes. I strongly encourage everyone to disturb a little bit of insulation. And of course, wear the proper PPE, personal protective equipment. I never begin to open an attic access panel without wearing my big heavy respirator. I don't know what's in there. I don't want to breathe it. I want to live to a ripe old age. I don't want to die of something I breathed by accident in an attic. So of course, I mean, this should go without saying. This is Home Inspector 101 stuff. Always wear your personal protective equipment, but by all means, lift up some insulation here and there. We're digging to see what type of insulation is down to the attic floor. So,
So what do you recommend, Reuben? If you're not recommending testing, what are you recommending?
I'll get to it.
Okay.
Thank you, Hoss. Vermiculite insulation isn't limited to attics. People are doing work. People are replacing light fixtures below the attic. Someone's replacing a bath fan. Someone's doing who knows what. That insulation can fall down and contaminate a bunch of other places. Here you're looking at the backside of a bathtub. The plumbing vents go right through this space up into the attic. There's a bunch of attic bypasses up there. All the insulation is falling down behind the bathtub. So we're not just finding it there. Here's a knee wall where they had the screen material and they filled the screen material mesh with vermiculite. That's vermiculite all through there. And then they're hanging all their clothes and using this as a closet. So what do we recommend? Anytime I come across vermiculite insulation, I don't tell people to test for it anymore. The reason that all of these tests came up negative is that the EPA threshold for an asbestos-containing product is 1%. If it contains more than 1% asbestos, it's an asbestos-containing product. Less than 1%, it's not. They draw a really clear line. As part of the class action lawsuit, they did a study on the effects of vermiculite insulation that contains less than 1% asbestos and its effects on the human health. Some of the nastiest stuff you could possibly have in your house, even at concentrations less than 1%, and it's always less than 1%. So you send this off to a lab, the lab will tell you it does not contain asbestos. Lab testing is useless for vermiculite insulation. If you want to know if it has asbestos, basically you got to figure out if it was made by zonalite, if it came from this one mine in Libby, Montana. To figure that out, go to this website. They will send you a free test kit. They send you a nice respirator. It's not the little paper mask. It's the same one that I wear during home inspections with the replaceable filter cartridges. They'll send you one of those respirators. They'll send you a collection kit and then who knows what else. There is funds that pays for this. They will send that out to the homeowner. Homeowner needs to take a little scoop of it, send it off to the lab, and then they will test for a trace mineral that was found in that lab. It's, I believe it was barium. They'll check to see if it has barium in there, and if it does have a certain amount, they say, yep, probably came from our mine. They're not even testing for asbestos. They say, yeah, it came from our mine, and we can begin the claim process where they will reimburse homeowners for X percentage, somewhere around 50% of removing the existing insulation and re-insulating. Got a hand in back? So the question is, how long does the trust go on for? I don't know. I'm sorry. The last time I read about this, I first learned about this 10 years ago. Up to 5 years ago, I probably could have told you, and I've since forgotten. Sorry. But they have all the information about it on their website. They've got a ton of info. And as far as I know, to the best of my recollection, it goes on until the funds are depleted. I think that's the way it worked. And they had something like $300 million or something that the trust was tasked with distributing. And I remember talking to the guy in charge of this. I had him come out to talk to our ASHI chapter. It was like, this was a challenge to distribute the funds. They were using funds for radio advertisements, for TV advertisements, everything they could just to tell the public, because they've got this huge chunk of money they need to distribute. And they don't want to sit on it for eternity. They have a legal obligation to disperse these funds. So I think that's the answer to your question, but I'm not 100% positive. So back to Hollis's question. What do I tell my clients when I find vermiculite insulation? We say a lot of this stuff came from this one mine. There was a huge class action lawsuit about it. I recommend you follow up, go to this website, have it tested, and if it does come from that one mine, have it removed and have your attic re-insulated. Is that cleared up? Yeah.
Hey, Reuben.
Yep. Hey, Jim.
There's no date on the website. It just says the trust is expected to operate for a minimum of 20 years. But it
Oh.
doesn't say when they published it.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. So now I feel more confident about my answer. Alan?
So it does actually. It started in 2014. That's when
2014.
W.R. Grace assumed the responsibility of it, and it starts from then.
Yep.
So we're 10
Yep.
years.
10, yeah, that's when I heard about it, 10 years ago. Okay, just a little bit of trivia, old house stuff. This type of insulation, I was asked about this, saw it one time. No, I asked about it. It's called linters. It's cotton insulation. There, now you can do your best to forget that because you'll probably never see it. Okay, we're on to chimneys. What do I got, 50 minutes? Is that right, Hollis? We're done at 12:20, is lunch? Okay. Is our chimney person here? It's all right.
Not yet.
Okay, it's all good. She can't contradict me if she's not here, right? Okay. All right, so old houses have chimneys, old houses have fireplaces, and they use the chimney to get their gas appliances to vent up and out of the house. Way back in the day, you could just take any old inefficient appliance and vent it right into the chimney. You could take a gravity furnace with a 50% efficiency rating. And by 50% efficient, I mean about half of the available heat coming into that furnace would be converted into heat for the house. The other half of the heat goes up the chimney. We have a very warm chimney. A warm chimney is a happy chimney. It drafts properly. We don't get condensation because everything is nice and hot. And the chimney stays healthy and nothing degrades. It works really well. But then step it up to a more modern appliance. Let's say we replace that 50% efficient gravity furnace, 100,000 BTUs. I'm trying to make the math easy. It's 100,000 BTUs. We step it up to a more efficient furnace. Maybe we install an 80,000 BTU.
You can find it on merch. Reuben from Michigan.
It's going to be 80% efficient. So I'm doing some difficult math here, but it means that 80% of that heat goes into heating the house. 20% of the heat heats the chimney. We tracking? 20% of 80,000 BTUs, what's that? 16,000 BTUs. So now we had a furnace kicking 50,000 BTUs into a chimney. Now we're going to drop it down to 16,000 BTUs. It's going to make the chimney way colder. What's going to happen to those flue gases? They're going to condense. And then what happens to the inside of the chimney? Gets eaten apart, destroys the inside of the chimney. And that's why when we're going from old inefficient appliances going into these furnaces, or going into these chimneys, and we step it up to something a little bit better. Now today, 80% efficient is about the worst furnace you can install. But back in the day, it was pretty good. Once we start doing this, it's really important we think about protecting the inside of our chimney, not letting that thing get destroyed from the inside out. I got a lot of photos. This will be a lot of what we're talking about today. But there's some other factors that's going to affect the temperature of the chimney. Again, we like warm chimneys. They draft well, less potential for condensation. When we've got a chimney right in the middle of the house, that's ideal. That's our happiest chimney. It's nice and warm all the way through. It's heated by the inside of the house. The only time it gets cold is kind of when it passes through the attic, and especially when it goes above the roof. But now you take a chimney and you move it to an outside wall, one of the outside walls of that chimney is going to be cold. That's a much colder chimney than going up the middle of the house. But then the worst scenario for a chimney is where we take it and we move it all the way outside of the house, so 3 walls of that chimney are exposed. That's the coldest chimney situation. And which one you have is going to make a dramatic difference, on the performance of that chimney. So we all know as home inspectors, the ones we should be paying the closest attention to, the ones we're most concerned about, are the ones that got 3 walls on the outside of the house, right? Right. Here's what it looks like when they're not done right. We've got a furnace and a water heater vented into this chimney, and this is what's going on. This is what will happen to all of them when you got modern appliances vented into here. You can see that there used to be a clay liner. It was a lined chimney. It's lined. Basically, the outside walls are made out of brick. That's the structure. And then down here, you've got a clay tile liner. That is a liner, but the liner has disintegrated. It has fallen apart a long time ago, and it's just fallen in on itself. And now the mortar and the bricks is starting to fail too. This is just going to keep happening. Here's another example of that. Yet another chimney where we've got this one, they did install a metal liner inside of the clay tile. So now we got a liner in a liner. That's usually the solution for these situations, is instead of having a chimney that's this big, and for the people who can't see me online, I'm holding my hands apart about a foot apart from each other. That's the diameter of these clay tile liners, roughly, sometimes. Now we take a metal liner, we drop it down inside, a metal liner might be 6 inches, maybe 5 inches, sometimes even 4 inches, if it's just a single water heater. And so those appliances only have a small space that they need to heat up. That's going to protect the rest of the inside of the chimney. It's going to keep that space warm. It's going to help prevent condensation. It's a great way of dealing with it. It's not hideously expensive. It's not super cheap, but it's very effective. Here's what it looks like. If we're looking down a chimney that's had a retrofit metal liner installed, this is what we're going to see. It looks a little janky. It almost looks like something from a Dr. Seuss book, but it is effective. This is just how they look. There's nothing wrong with this. They can even use, wait a minute. I said there's nothing wrong. No, there's nothing wrong. When I looked at it on a different monitor, it looked like there was a separated section. Yeah, someone just commented online, says looks disconnected. I don't know, maybe it is disconnected. I can't tell from my photo. If this is disconnected here, that's super wrong. This joint up here, you're looking at that. This one I'd call pretty inconsequential, but this, now I don't know. I think that is disconnected. If that's disconnected, that's super bad news. I'm a huge fan of home inspectors getting up on the roof and looking down the chimney, doing anything you can to spot stuff like this. You start looking, you're going to start seeing it.
Reuben, in our area, most of the time it's continuous stainless steel corrugated.
And yeah, and we see a lot of those in my area too. Continuous stainless steel corrugated. You won't get separated sections like that. Just more expensive. Yep. Here, the chimney was just falling apart. We had a big hole in the side of the chimney. Don't know what caused it. I suspect we had some fixtures venting into it that shouldn't have been. This one, oh yeah, here. This is why I'm a huge fan of home inspectors getting up there and looking down. This is the outside of the chimney. Looks pretty good. Didn't really have any concerns with this, but then you get up on the roof and you look down the middle, this is what it looks like. We've got a total hot mess. This thing's falling apart. Just because you see a metal vent coming out of the chimney, out of the top of the chimney, doesn't mean that all the appliances are vented into it. What you're looking at here is a liner for a furnace that's going up and out of the chimney. We're down inside the basement right now. And then that other pipe coming in, that's the vent connector for the water heater. So the water heater is venting into the annular space between the chimney walls and the furnace's vent. Bad news. It's not going to warm up enough. The water heater is not going to draft properly. Even if it does draft properly, you're going to get crazy condensation inside there. The only way to do this right is to have the water heater's vent connector connect to the furnace's vent connector before it enters the chimney. That's the proper fix. And this is part of the reason we do everything we can to look inside those chimneys. Any holes, little pie plate or something, we'll take it off. I may have even grabbed onto a water heater vent connector once or twice when it wasn't hot and just tried pulling it out of the chimney to see what happens. Don't tell anybody I did this. I'm not licensed to do that. You might call that work. But I found a lot of them where I pull it out and find it's not venting into anything. Here, we've got the metal vent liner sticking up out of the top of the chimney. It's missing a cap, should technically have a cap. The chimney is in horrible shape, but we're talking about the metal vent liner. And the reason you need caps is, number one, to help prevent rain from dumping in, and number two, to help prevent downdrafts. When you got the right wind blowing over the top of that, you can actually push the exhaust gases back down and cause the appliances to backdraft. That's why we need a cap on there. Now, if you don't have a cap, is it the end of the world? Probably not.
And a third issue, and at least in our region, is raccoons and bats.
Raccoons and bats. Okay. All right. I like it. I don't see a lot of those in my area coming down chimneys, but we do find squirrels and birds. So pests. But you know what? We'll all be in agreement there. Pests. It's a nice all-inclusive word. I don't know if you guys have the same issue in your area as we do in ours. And I just learned about this. I never knew about it. We do level 2 inspections at my company for chimneys. I'll get into what that is, but I got one employee of mine who goes to work for a chimney contractor during the winter because in Minnesota it gets really slow, and I'm happy to have him work for somebody else for a little while. And learn through him that HVAC contractors, the people installing furnaces and water heaters, their work stops at the chimney. They don't look inside the chimney. They don't touch it. They don't do nothing with it. And we have found countless appliances, new appliances installed with a permit, venting in a crap like this. That's a metal liner going up the inside of a chimney. It's completely toast. There's nothing left of it. And they had a new appliance installed at this same setup. Inspected by the city, it's all approved. Completely wrong. So it let us know we need to pay closer attention to all this stuff. We can't rely on people pulling permits to get it right. Just because it's new doesn't make it right. This one, they did have a metal liner, but the metal liner ended short of the top of the chimney. Can you guess about where the metal liner ended? Yeah, you all know. Right here. Right where they got all this, what's that called? Tuck caulking? Is that a technical term? No, I made that up. That's right where the chimney starts to explode. Yeah.
This time. Do you have any idea why that metal liner corroded? I was under the impression, I thought the metal liners was so that you would not have corrosion in the chimney.
If you have condensation in a metal liner, it will corrode. The idea with the metal is that you're going to help prevent condensation from happening. That's we're making the space smaller
Because it's heating up.
because it's heating up quicker. However, if it's oversized, you will have corrosion on it. That's galvanized steel. And when you get condensation, it'll eat through this. The most common scenario for that to happen, and man, you couldn't have asked your question at a better time, because the most common situation for that happening is when you've got a furnace and a water heater. They vent connector, they vent together, they share the flue, and they go up and out of the house. And then the heating contractor comes in and says, I'm going to give you a new high efficiency furnace. So they remove the furnace vent. So instead of having an 80,000 BTU furnace and a 40,000 BTU water heater venting into the space, creating up to 120,000 BTUs of heat minus, whatever. You get where I'm going with this. You got a ton of heat going up there. Now we remove the furnace. All you got left is the water heater venting into there. And that's what I'm showing you here. Almost every one of these situations, you got a 6-inch vent for the furnace and water heater. Once you don't have the furnace going in there anymore, this is called an orphaned vent. It's just the water heater. And that water heater works really well with a 4-inch vent. That's what it needs. You go into a 6-inch vent? Pardon? You got to put a liner. Yeah, that's bad news. And that's what I'm showing you here. We used to have a traditional furnace. There's the vent connector for it. It ends. We've got the water heater's 4-inch vent connector going into a 6-inch vent. What's going to happen as it vents in there? That's what's going to happen. You're going to get crazy condensation, and I can't guarantee it. In some cases, maybe it is going to work okay. But in a lot of cases, especially when you've got that chimney all the way on the outside of the house, you're going to have some crazy problems on the inside of that flue. And it's going to deteriorate apart. Appliances won't draft properly. That's where we got issues. Question here. Yeah.
So essentially, what I understand is it's made an expansion valve.
So the question is, are you making an expansion valve?
Creating the volume. You've got hot air going in, you create an expansion valve, and now it's cooling off and condensing.
I suppose that's fair. You could call it an expansion valve. I've never thought of it that way, but maybe, yeah.
At least in our area, if you have an orphan water heater, doesn't matter where it is, it has to be lined.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
the way it should be. It's the same way in my area. If you have an orphan water heater, it needs to be lined. Doesn't mean it happens.
No.
We catch them all the time where it's not done.
Mhm.
Yes. There's an example of a nice liner where they had a 6-inch liner. They took a 4-inch corrugated stainless steel thingy. They ran it all the way up the chimney for this water heater. Great job. Looks good. Again, it's one of those Dr. Seuss looking things, but I'd say this looks fine. This is good. See a hand in back? Yeah, come on up to the mic, please.
If I may, in this area, you will still find dual fuels being put into at least masonry chimneys. That is oil and gas, that, have not been upgraded. You have to really be looking for that and letting your clients know that more than likely that flue liner, if there is one, is toast, because the sulfur, the sulfuric acid in that fuel oil mixing with the condensation that occurs with the gas tears them apart.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. If I ever find a dual fuel, I will try to remember that. Don't see a lot of them in my area. Okay. So back to this. Is this okay? Is this an acceptable material? Is this a dryer vent connector? Or is that a proper vent liner? I don't know. I can't really tell from this photo, but if I am trying to figure it out, what I'm looking for is some kind of label. Like this says a listed gas vent connector. Now, a gas vent connector, that's not a liner. That's just something that gets you from the vent or from the appliance to the vent. But it tells me it's an approved material. This is just an example of a label I'd be looking for on that corrugated thingy. And this is what it looks like at the top. You can see we've got a 6-inch vent, and then we got a much smaller vent liner going through it. Beautiful. Nice work. That's what we should see. And then when we've got a vent liner coming up the middle of the chimney, of course, we don't want water just dumping around this area here, that annular space. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to cause any huge damage, but that water's got to go somewhere. And a lot of the time you're going to have a drain at the bottom of the chimney. And if you got a big, heavy torrential rain and you got a fair amount of water coming in there, it might be enough to leak onto the basement floor. And then your client's going to call you up and say, my house is leaking. What do I do? Why didn't you catch this, etc. So, we'll usually tell our clients, put something like this at the top, just fashion a piece of sheet metal. This looks perfectly fine. But in reality, if you do get a little bit of water leaking in, it's not going to be a big deal. It's more about managing client concerns. When I'm looking at the outsides of chimneys, basically my rule of thumb is if I can stick a tool into the side of the chimney, I call for service. This chimney needs some tuck pointing. I am always careful to look at all 4 sides of every chimney. This was the same chimney on the same day. Somebody had tuck pointed the front 2 sides of the chimney that you could see from the street, and the other 2 sides remained completely untouched. We've got mortar coming out of this all over the place. Big concern in my area. I'm guessing it ought to be a concern in your area too, is stucco covered chimneys. We got a lot of these in my area, and that's what you're seeing here. On just about all of these stucco covered chimneys, they thought, all right, these chimney walls are not going to be exposed to the elements, they're not going to be exposed to water, so we don't need the good bricks. We can use the really cheap limestone bricks because it's all going to be protected with stucco. So they were using a brick that was never supposed to be exposed to the outdoor elements. And then they covered it with stucco, but if you know anything about the way stucco works, it's not a waterproof material. Water is going to get through the stucco. And over time, as water gets through here, it disintegrates these bricks. And that's what we're seeing. This thing is just falling apart on the inside. I learned about this on this house. This was close to a decade ago. One of my inspectors inspected this chimney. It was a big house in St. Paul, big chimney on the front of the house. It went up like 2.5 stories. It's massive. They got a couple wood burning fireplaces. It's all covered in stucco. And it got some stonework at the top. It all looks pretty nice. It's recently been kind of all smoothed over and patched. No big concerns there, right? Looks good. I think it looks good. We're coming down a little bit. You got some stucco that's coming loose on the front. That should be serviced, right? Loose stucco. Don't want water coming in there. I mean, it's just brick behind it. It's not like it's the end of the world, but still, it should be serviced. And we mentioned you got some loose stucco, some cracks, some stucco looks like it's coming loose at the front of the chimney. Have it serviced. Marked it as attention recommended. This house had a lot of stuff that was going on. Like it had a lead water supply line, had knob and tube wiring. It had a garage that was kind of sliding down a hill, vermiculite in the attic, all the stuff we talked about today. And this wasn't really that high on the homeowner's list. They weren't super concerned about little loose stucco on the outside of the chimney. So they didn't call anybody to deal with it until they had been in the house for about 6 months. And then when they did call someone out, the chimney contractor said, "Oh yeah, your chimney, it looks like Reuben's slide here. Looks like that on the inside all the way through. I don't have anything to attach stucco to. You need a new chimney. That'll be $20,000. We're going to have to rebuild it." And he ended up calling another another chimney contractor, or another stucco guy, excuse me. Next stucco guy told him the same thing. And eventually it gets back to me. He said, "Hey, Reuben, your guy missed a huge issue. I need a new chimney. So if you could kindly send the $20,000 check to this address, that'd be great." I'm like, wait a minute. Let me have you talk to my chimney guy. So I had my chimney guy go out there and he's like, yeah, Reuben, I think you guys may have kind of missed this. And by the way, this is what pretty much every stucco covered chimney in the Twin Cities looks like. This should be a concern with all of them. It's not just this one chimney. And from that day forward, we've taken a very different approach. And when we find a stucco covered chimney, we always say, you need further inspection. I mean, at best, we say it's suspect. When we see cracks, any signs of deterioration, we say, get a chimney expert out here to see about having it fixed. And
So Reuben, I'm getting the sense that you learn from your experiences.
Sure try not to learn twice from the same experience, try to learn once. Yeah, all it takes is these expensive, painful experiences. So here, this is called the Neapolitan chimney. You got the stucco covered chimney, you got the limestone brick, and then they've rebuilt it with new brick where it all fell apart, and then they got a bunch of stonework to make it fancy looking. And they left the limestone brick that was still in good shape, they left that alone. But time has taken care of that. And this stuff is falling apart. Now all this stucco is coming off. You're just chasing it. Eventually, basically, this whole chimney needs to come down. You're just kicking the can down the road with this. Here's another one. Let's take a closer look. Oh, sorry. We don't have good enough resolution to see what's going on. It's a stucco covered chimney. And from here up, they rebuilt the chimney with concrete blocks. Just a matter of time before they got to rebuild the rest of it going down. Here's another stucco covered chimney. Look at where it's cracked and it's just falling off. Major patching on the back side of it. This one, we got patching all up and down the chimney. We get a little closer, you can see the patching is all starting to shrink away. This stuff is all going to be falling off soon. Here we've got the stucco coming off. You can see the bricks are falling apart on the inside. Look at that one. Woof. That's a chimney. And you can see the metal liner going all the way up. We've got a big old scar where the stucco and the bricks are completely gone. There's another one. These are all houses that we've seen in the Twin Cities. We have taken all these pictures. I'm not Googling these. We have personally taken all of these. Okay, so stucco covered chimneys, we're concerned about all of them. We're always having something to say about them. Few other things about chimneys. When we see these cracks at the tops of chimneys, these can emit water. These should always be serviced. You should not have gaps that can emit water between the clay tile and the crown or the wash, whatever you want to call this, the mortar cap. Technically, what you should have is a fairly large space between the mortar and the clay tile so that someone can put a nice, big, thick, like 3/8 inch bead of caulk in between those two materials so they can expand and contract at different rates, and we're not going to have water leaking in. Usually we're not so lucky. I'm happy if we just have a little bit of caulk around here to keep water from coming in. And then the third spot that should be addressed, right where the cap comes in contact with the bricks, through capillary action, that will suck water in too. So 3 different areas at the crown here that I want to see addressed.
You've mentioned several times that you find this a lot in the Twin Cities areas. Have you heard about this condition in, is this relevant to the East Coast? I mean,
Stucco covered chimneys?
well, in particular, stucco covered chimneys with limestone brick. I'm getting is the issue. Is that not correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's specifically with limestone brick. And I don't know if you guys have the same issues or not.
I
Anybody in
personally
the room ever
haven't
come
heard of
across it? Okay. And it's one of those things where once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it, and you'll see more and more of them.
We see a lot of the salmon, the really soft salmon bricks.
Okay,
And they, you get them wet, they fall apart. Never mind
yeah,
acid.
yeah. So there's a few different places on the crown that should be addressed. And then just looking at the rest of this chimney, thinking about what else we got here. On the far right side, we've got an unused flue. They've got mortar on the top of it. Anytime you've got an unused flue, I would much prefer to see just a solid metal cap going over the top of that. That mortar is going to deteriorate over time. Water can seep in. Next, we've got the metal liner for the furnace and the water heater. Ideally, we'd have a little cap preventing rain from incidentally dumping down in here. Not the end of the world if we don't have it. And then we've probably got a first floor fireplace and a basement fireplace. Like to see a cap on these, along with the spark arrestor, something that's going to prevent, sparks from coming out of there and landing on a wood roof and starting on fire. But more realistically, like Bob talked about earlier, squirrels, raccoons, birds, whatever else, critters from getting inside the chimney. So, are you required to inspect the interior of this chimney? This is what the ASHI standard of practice says. It says you do not need to inspect the interior of the vent system, flue, and chimney if it's not readily accessible. You don't need to if it's not readily accessible. So does that mean you do need to if it is readily accessible? That's the way I read it. Is this readily accessible? I don't know. I don't have the answers. Just throwing out questions for you guys. I think someone could make a very good argument that this is readily accessible. I'm not trying to split hairs. My point is that I suggest doing everything you possibly can to inspect the insides of these chimneys. There's a lot to see. There's a lot that can go wrong. If you need to bring your drill with you when you're getting on the roof or a screwdriver, and you got to remove one of these metal caps so you can put your face there and look down it, I suggest doing it. I would do that on every inspection I possibly could. and it's all about exceeding our standard of practice.
Yeah, you can look down that chimney all day long, and if you don't have a camera, you can't see everything.
100% agree. 100% agreed. And we'll talk about that. Oh, by the way, definition of readily accessible. Available for visual inspection without requiring moving of personal property, dismantling, destructive measures, or actions that will likely involve risk to persons or property. I mean, I guess you could say if I brought a ladder up, I can't reach it, even if I stand on my tiptoes. If I put a ladder on there, that would risk damage to me. Okay, it's not readily accessible. I don't have the answer to this. Dismantle. If I'm taking a cap off, am I dismantling it? Yeah, probably. Does that mean I can't? No, I still can. I'm just not required to. Am I going to? Heck yes, every time. If I can, I certainly will. This is the cap I'm talking about. That's the spark arrestor and the cap that prevents hot embers from rising up and landing on your roof. This is the only time I've ever seen that happen in my life. And I don't even know that it was a hot ember, but what you're looking at on the left side of the picture here, this is the apron flashing at the bottom of a chimney. I think that's what caused this, but I don't know. But like we said earlier, mostly it's to prevent critters from coming in. That's an albino squirrel. I put my face right over the chimney and I really jumped. That's what was there to greet me. So to Jim's point, what are you going to see if you're not using a camera? I'll show some pictures of some stuff I've seen. It's not to say you will never see anything, but if you're not using a camera, there's a lot that can be missed. And NFPA 211 is a nationally published standard, comes from NFPA, National Fire Protection Agency. They write all of the fire protection codes. They write the National Electrical Code. That's just another chapter out of NFPA. They've got this document called 211. It talks about safety standards for chimneys and fireplaces and all that jazz. To the best of my knowledge, nobody has ever adopted this anywhere as code. It's not a requirement, but it is a standard that people can choose to follow. And there are portions of NFPA 211 that have been brought into and adopted into the model codes. If you go to chapter 10 of the IRC, the International Residential Code, the part that deals with chimneys, they use language out of NFPA 211. They reference this and they say chimneys shall be constructed in accordance with NFPA 211 section blah, 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 blah. So it's a national standard. It's a good thing to follow. It's just not a rule. It's not a requirement. So don't ever say, hey, if you're buying a house, the code requirement is that you have a level 2 inspection. No, but NFPA 211 does recommend it. And the language there, they say when you're making changes to a system or upon the sale or transfer of a property, they recommend a level 2 inspection. And that's where you take a camera and you run it up the chimney or you run it down the chimney and you inspect all of these areas that you can't see with your home inspector flashlight. You get to see a whole lot more. Here's what it looks like. We got chimney dude assembling his rod. He's got these rods that each section threads together and he's running it down there. Well, I could say my company, we do chimney inspections. We've got a couple of people on my team who are certified chimney sweeps. They're certified through the Chimney Safety Institute of America, CSIA. And when we first got into doing this, we would use this fancy chimney camera. I'm not going to throw any manufacturers under the bus, but it was like a $10,000 camera. And it had this rotating head and it would do all this fancy stuff. And it's got like a keyboard and a screen. And it took mind-blowing 640 by 480 photos. That's the same resolution the first digital cameras took, Sony Mavicas back in 1998. That's the photos it took. And we were constantly underwhelmed by the quality of these photos. And eventually we switched over and we started using a GoPro. we would just attach a GoPro to the end of these sticks. And oh my goodness, what a world of difference. I mean, GoPro's pictures are just stunningly clear. You know exactly what you're talking about. That was awesome. But then we'd run into connectivity issues when you're doing a chimney inspection and you're like 20, 28 feet away from your source. That Wi-Fi connection didn't work so well. And we found the ferret cameras. You'll see them at a lot of home inspector conferences. The ferret cameras have a much better range than the GoPro cameras. And that's what we use for our chimney inspections now. So we've gone from like a $10,000 camera down to a $150 camera, and the quality has done the opposite. While the price has done this, the quality has done this. So I kind of call it a win-win. Now we got some special stuff. We got these special poles that we need to get to run up and down the chimney, and we got this special thing that kind of centers the camera in the middle of the chimney, and we got a special light kit that we put on there. You know, it's been a lot of trial and error to figure out the right rig to do these inspections, but we finally got it dialed in pretty well. And
Was that facing? It's a nice 7-iron putt right to it.
we offer level 2 chimney inspections on every home inspection. If it's got a masonry a wood burning fireplace.
Nice, dude. Perfect.
2 inspections. And I can tell you the number of chimneys that pass the inspection where we say, this is all in good shape, you're safe to burn wood. I could probably count on one hand the number we have ever come across that we said, yeah, we bless this and you're good to go. It is extremely rare. Almost every one we look at, there's problems. And I'll show you, there's one of the chimney guys. This is not one of my employees. I would not have my employees doing this. This is back when we used to sub out with a chimney inspection company. And I'm pretty sure that's before he had kids too. He would not be doing that again today. But there's what they're doing. Here's stuff we find. Now these are photos I took with my phone or my camera. Now I'm not doing a chimney inspection. I'm just doing a home inspection. And so here's some of the stuff that you could see. So I'm telling you, I strongly recommend the level 2 inspection anytime you got a wood burning fireplace. But just because you're making that recommendation doesn't mean that your responsibilities as a homeowner end and you just say, I'm done. I still strongly recommend you do all that you possibly can. I mean, look at this. You got nasty all the way down.
I should have put your 7-iron part. Yeah.
Horrible condition. Look at this one. This is how it was built. You've got a 4-inch gap between 2 different tile sections. Bad news. This one, this is a fun story. This is what I saw when I got up on the chimney and I looked down. I had to use my 28-foot extension ladder to climb to the top of it and look down, because looking up the inside, I couldn't see squat. Here, let's zoom in a little. You see what's going on there? I'm looking down it. The clay tile liner is gone. I don't know what happened, but halfway down the chimney, the clay tile liner is gone. This is in nasty condition. So, huh? Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it was ever put in. I'm not sure. I don't know how we got here. I didn't try to figure it out. I just said, that ain't right. You need to get it fixed. And they ended up having a chimney guy tell them, yeah, there's no fixing this. You need to put a liner in. And I don't know if it's big enough to get a liner down there. So this is going to be a big deal. The buyer ended up walking away. And then my office got called to do an inspection on the same house like a week later. And then I see an email come through. It's this. This is an actual screenshot. This comes from the listing agent. And then it got forwarded to my office. See below from the sellers. You may want to get this to the inspector. I have an invoice from so-and-so's chimney service verifying the chimney is safe and in working order. I'll send you that. This chimney, same week, safe and in working order. How could that be? I'll tell you how in a second. So I ended up saying, I don't know how this is possible. I think the chimney guy and I need to get on the same page. We need to go out to the house together. And so I ended up coordinating for him to meet my inspector there. I wasn't doing the second inspection. I did the first inspection. Somebody else was doing the second one, but I ended up showing up there because I didn't want to burden my other inspector with all of this. But I met the chimney guy there and the buyers and the realtor. And I don't remember who else. We had a big lawn party. And he shows up in his Jeep, in his cargo shorts, and his no ladder outfit. And I said, all right, so I'm wondering, how did you inspect the chimney? And he said, well, you look from the firebox. And I didn't say this to him, but I thought to myself, you can't see a thing from the firebox. I looked up the firebox. I couldn't see anything. That's how you said it's in safe and working? I didn't say this. I said, you know what, you should use my ladder. He used my extension ladder. He got up there, he looked down. He gets off his ladder and he's just kind of looking at the ground and mumbling to himself. I'm like, what's up? He's like, well, I'm just trying to think of how we could get a liner in there. And I'm like, liner? What liner? I got an email saying it's safe and in working order. And he's like, well, yeah. And I'm like, all right, okay. So now it's really uncomfortable. Like I'm putting him on the spot. I just the buyers are here. Just make it really short and sweet. Is this chimney safe and in working order? He said, no, you can't build a fire in there. All right, thank you. Two-handed shake. Thank you. So you did a good job. Let him go. But he's super embarrassed, of course, at this point. And it was a real wake-up moment for me where I realized there are a ton of chimney contractors, and I know it's not a Minnesota thing. I know you got the same thing in your area too, where you got a ton of chimney contractors who are chimney dudes. They're not certified or licensed or any of that by anybody. They haven't gone through any formal training on making sure that these chimneys and fireplaces are safe. And they're not following any type of standard for doing these inspections. They're just looking up the flue, but they're the chimney guy, so people trust them. I know you guys have the same thing going on. And after that experience, I got really careful about making recommendations for inspections by CSIA certified chimney sweeps. And that's it. Not having a licensed chimney contractor come out to look at it. I got really specific in my language after that.
I don't know that use of a camera is mentioned in the specs for level 2 inspection.
I think it is. I think it is.
Because it wasn't the last time I looked. Yeah.
I don't have it.
So
handy.
we have these guys coming out and saying they're doing a level 2 inspection, no camera. So what
With
I put
no
in,
camera?
what I put in my report is you need a level 2 inspection with a camera.
Interesting. I've never heard anybody make that point.
And I've watched a local chimney sweep put the ladder up, hand the buyer the invoice, buyer pays him, truck drives away. Then the buyer looks at me and says, did he have a camera? I'm like, no, but look, it says on the invoice, camera. I'm like, no, there was no camera.
Wow. Wild.
CSIA.
CSIA. So it sounds like you've got some clowns in your area too.
Yeah.
It's not just me. It's good to know. A few more examples. We're at time. My lesson here is that I saw some cheesy repairs at this chimney. You can see it was kind of falling apart. I ended up seeing the invoice. They said, yeah, we got it fixed. Here it is, $214. And this is what it looked like when it was all fixed. And I said, all they did was smear mortar on there. I could have done that. And this is what it looks like the third time they got it fixed. They basically rebuilt the upper portion of it. Beautiful details here. And some other stuff that comes from Tom Feza. Nice design on a chimney cap is exactly what we saw in that last photo. You're going to have an overhang. You're going to have a capillary break underneath it. It's going to protect the chimney walls from all that water running down. That's a good cap to last a lifetime. The previous one like this, where all the water sheds down the walls, it's going to deteriorate a lot faster. A million of them look like that. I'm not gonna look at this chimney and say, hey, you need to rebuild it if the walls look like they're in good shape. But when it is rebuilt, this is a great way to do it. That's a good design. So we talked about CSIA. That's who we're looking for. Those are the right people to do these chimney inspections. If you want to find somebody in your area, you can go to their website. The one thing I would caution you on, though, if you're referring other chimney professionals in your area, is that I had a lot of people get frustrated with us recommending these chimney contractors because all of them would find the exact same thing that we find on every single one we inspect. The chimney's in horrible condition. And then they would provide a bid on replacement, and people would say, well, they're just trying to drum up money. And it costs a ton of money to reline these chimneys, and these guys are unethical. They're not unethical. They're just doing their job, but it would appear that way. And I dealt with a lot of frustrated people, and that's what drove us to start doing them in-house for my company. Show of hands, who does it in-house at their company? That's it? Come on, guys, I see you from ProTech. I know you guys do it in-house. I'm giving you, I'm asking, how many people do chimney inspections? Level 2 chimney inspections? Yeah, just about nobody. If you can partner up with somebody who does chimney inspections and doesn't do repairs, I'd say that's ideal, but I can't tell you who you got in your market. Doesn't ProTech have another company that does that? No? Okay, all right. Very good, very good. Heating, you know what? This is all pretty short. We're at time. I think we'll just end at chimneys. We'll call it good. Thanks for having me out, guys. It's lunchtime. Appreciate it.